I merely poured a bucket of water into a mud puddle, and just like that, I unlocked an infinite water source that I could never use up. I casually scattered a few seeds on barren soil, and instantly, I harvested mountains of food. Even when an army of 1,000 vicious wasteland pillagers besieged my city, I just casually stood 100 meters in the sky and slowly poured down a bucket of lava and a bucket of water. Because in my Minecraft rules, the collision of water and lava equals a 3-second, fully formed, 100-meter pure stone giant wall that can never be breached. Looking at the enemy army outside the wall, terrified to the point of wetting themselves and dropping their armor to flee, I turned around, slapped together a normal wooden chest using a few oak planks, and tossed a sizzling plate of roast meat inside. Because next up, I was preparing to give this brutal medieval world a physics lesson as long as it's placed inside my chest. The time inside the food is absolutely frozen. Now, it's time to test if the NPCs of reality can open my Pandora's box. I muttered in my heart, immediately setting up a password in my mind. Then, I turned to look at the job-changed serf I had casually grabbed nearby, lifting my chin to point at the large wooden chest. Now you try again. See if you can open it? The serf stepped forward, grabbed the chest lid with both hands, and lifted with all his might. His face turned beet red, but the chest didn't budge an inch. He scratched his head, his face full of confusion. "It's no use, Lord Silas. I think I need some kind of incantation to open it." I told him the password. As he repeated it out loud, a crisp click echoed, and the wooden chest popped right open. Interesting. Job-changed villagers can actually lock chests. I stepped forward, didn't enter the password at all, and just casually lifted it. The lid popped right open for me, just as I thought. As everyone knows, everything inside a villager's chest belongs to the player. As the sole supreme admin of this world, I have absolute control. Any password lock is practically non-existent to me. Now I was completely relieved this chest could not only be loaded onto a carriage and moved anywhere, but it was also 100 thief-proof. I waved my hand, acting as a complete hands-off boss. "Take this chest and deliver it to the Internal Affairs Officer, Elwyn." After sorting out the logistics, I looked up at the sky. It was about time. Outside Oak Village, the group of refugees who had been resting and recovering their stamina for a few days were now lining up with fanatical expressions. Today, for them, was the day they'd ascend to heaven and change their destinies. The sorting ceremony officially begins. I grinned, ready to fully satisfy my urge to cosplay as Hogwarts. The refugees poured into the job shrine complex as carefully as if they were on a pilgrimage. When they finally got a clear view of the scene before them, everyone lost their voices. Only heavy breathing remained. On the flat ground, a full 13 massive buildings of various shapes had risen from nothing. The Farmers' Guild was covered in wildflowers and golden wheat. The Mason's Hall looked as if it had been cleaved straight out of a mountain. The shepherd's hut was patched together from countless threads of fine wool. And in the very center stood the cleric's sanctuary, a massive glass palace where sunlight pierced through, refracting thousands of brilliant rainbows onto the ground. A miracle. This is an absolute miracle. Someone's face flushed red as they dropped to their knees, frantically kissing the ground. In the crowd, an old scholar named Justin took a deep breath, straightened his ragged linen robes, and stepped into the librarian's hall. This old geezer had solid RNG. The moment he got close to the lectern, a job icon immediately popped up above his head. "Justin, Scholar's Hall." A city guard arranged by Elwyn yelled at the top of his lungs in the distance. "I got it. I've been chosen." Justin weakly adjusted the phantom glasses that appeared out of thin air on his face, crying tears of sheer joy. Before long, this batch of freshmen wearing all sorts of different job hats was brought before me. I glanced at Justin and directly opened his trading interface. Taking one look, I almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Curse of Binding? Aqua Affinity? What kind of underworld magical enchantment books are these? I closed the interface in disgust. Looking at his aura, which was identical to a modern-day strict school dean, I casually asked, "Can you teach?" Justin was overwhelmed by the unexpected favor and quickly bowed with his hand over his heart. "I have shallow knowledge, but I am willing to use my meager strength to impart sacred knowledge and clear the confusion of the masses." "Great," I slapped my thigh. "When we build an academy in the city later, you'll be the headmaster." With the education issue settled, the next step was boosting my own raw stats. Iron armor was outdated. It was time to upgrade my arsenal. I called over all the serfs in the village who farmed wheat and spam-clicked the trade button. After dumping thousands of stacks of wheat, emeralds instantly filled up my inventory. Holding the heavy emeralds, I turned right around and went to find Cedric the armor. 7 emeralds for iron leggings, 4 for iron boots. I went on a shopping spree, forcefully power leveling the armorer from novice all the way to master. A flash of golden light, and the ultimate trade option unlocked full enchanted diamond armor. I bought it immediately. Diamond leggings with projectile protection 3, diamond chestplate with projectile protection 2. Even though it couldn't perfectly block heavy broadsword slashes in melee combat, in this medieval era where matchlock guns were just starting to spread, projectile protection was basically a god-tier bulletproof vest. What satisfied me the most was the diamond helmet, which came with fire protection eye and respiration eye. This was practically tailor-made for the massive stunt I was about to pull next. I took off the old iron armor and put on this set of diamond armor, sparkling with a deep blue magical glow. At the bottom of my vision, that row of armor icons equal in length to my health bar instantly maxed out. Secure. unprecedentedly secure. Let's see who in this Roland kingdom could possibly break my defense now. With the armor sorted, it was time for logistics. I turned to find Oswald the farmer, whose initial trade was wheat, and continued to smash emeralds into him, upgrading him all the way to master. The trade window refreshed, and 2 top-tier items popped out. Glistering melon slices and golden carrots. With golden carrots, my herd of horses grazing on the meadow could finally start breeding. While I was at it, I also traded for a few bowls of suspicious stew bubbling with purple and green gas. Elwyn was watching from the side, his heart leaping into his throat, terrified that this witch-like poison would kill me. He insisted on taste testing it for me. I ignored him, closed my eyes, and downed it in one gulp. My vision instantly went black, but the blindness effect vanished after just 1 second. The taste was surprisingly delicious, carrying the rich aroma of mushrooms and a subtle floral scent. Elwyn, go call Brum. Tell him to bring me the 2 fastest, pure-blooded warhorses from the stable. Before long, Brum ran over leading 2 muscular black horses. Lord Silas, this one is Black Wind, and that one is Raven. They are absolutely the most handsome lads in the stable. Excellent. I nodded in satisfaction. I pulled out the golden carrots, and then took out the arrow of swiftness I had gotten from the previous village defense battle. My plan was simple. First, let these 2 top-tier IRL horses breed. When the foal grows up, hit it with an arrow of swiftness to give it a movement speed buff, and then feed it golden carrots to force breed it under Minecraft rules. IRL horses ultimate genetics Minecraft's infinite stamina and never-tiring rule setting the artificial mythical mount breeding plan, perfectly looped. With everything on track, Elwyn suddenly stepped forward, placed his hand on his chest, and proposed, Lord Silas, now that the city walls are built and the refugees have been integrated, the scale of our place has long surpassed a mere village. Don't you think it's time for a name change? A name change? True, calling it Oak Village was indeed starting to sound cheap. I thought about it and blurted out, how about calling it Dawn's Keep? Elwyn sharply raised his head, his eyes fanatical, as if he had just comprehended some divine revelation. Dawn? It signifies dispelling the long night of the Dark Ages, the city of daybreak. My lord, this name is truly a masterpiece for the ages. Brum beside him also nodded frantically. Great name. What a great name. Looking at them, overthinking it so much, I was momentarily speechless. Alright, fine, if you guys say that's what it means, then that's what it means. Time flew by, entering August. Just as I was insanely grinding my infrastructure, a massive earthquake happened in the power center of the royal capital far away. The old king passed away, and the new King Charles ascended the throne. The Roland kingdom officially entered its final countdown to death. But I had absolutely no time to care about these historical messes, because the villagers right in front of me had started acting up. Early in the morning, right as I walked into Mushroom Town, I saw Elwyn and Brum acting all secretive, holding a box wrapped in red cloth. After I caught them red-handed, that disloyal guy Brum bolted, leaving Elwyn standing awkwardly in the wind. I walked closer to take a look. Inside the box was actually a wooden carving. Its brows were elegant, its eyes compassionate. Wait, isn't that carving literally me? Sweating profusely, Elwyn explained to me that a carpenter in the city had been carving my holy statues every day, and now everyone in the city was keeping one in their homes, crossing themselves and praying to it daily. I waved it off, not caring. If they want to worship, let them worship. You came at just the right time. I was looking for you. Go to the dungeon and bring out those 2 pillagers we locked up, Cashin and Scarface. Elwyn was completely confused but obediently went to do it. I turned around, walked to an empty clearing, and started getting down to business. I pulled out cobblestone and built a 5x4 frame. Next, I poured a bucket of water over the top of the frame. As the water cascaded down, I immediately pulled out a bucket of scorching lava and poured it precisely on the edge of the frame. Sizzle! The water and lava violently collided, instantly erupting into massive clouds of white steam. Deep purple, rock-hard blocks formed within the water. Obsidian. I scooped the water back into the bucket, looked at the standard rectangular door frame in front of me, and clapped my hands in satisfaction. The casting method for building a nether portami skills weren't rusty yet. Next, I pulled out my flint and steel and struck it hard against the bottom of the frame. With a boom, the void seemed to be forcibly ripped apart. A bizarre, swirling purple curtain of light crazily twisted and expanded in the center of the frame. Countless purple particles drifted in the air, emitting a low hum that made one's scalp tingle. Lord Silas, what is this? Elwyn's legs were shaking uncontrollably. I turned my head and grinned. This is called a nether portal. Of course, you can also call it hell. Ash, hell? Elwyn was so terrified he almost sat flat on the ground, his face instantly turning deathly pale. Medieval people's fear of what comes after death was carved into their very bones. The 9 circles of hell from Dante's Inferno, mountains of blades and seas of fire, those were taboo words that would scare anyone out of their wits if they even brushed against the concept. At that moment, Brum walked over, escorting Cashin and Scarface. Cashin, that dog still had a tough mouth. As he struggled, he crazily spat in my direction. Bah, you fake, black magic heretic. I've killed so many people. I've long since earned my keep. The worst that happens is going to hell. I'm not even afraid of death. You think I'm afraid of you? The worst that happens is going to hell? I laughed out of sheer anger, pointing directly at the purple flashing portal. Alright, I'll grant your wish today. Brum, throw him in. Oh, and tie up a live chicken and throw it in too. Brum didn't say a word, kicked Cashin right in the back of the knees, grabbed his collar, and shoved his entire body straight into the purple curtain of light. Less than a minute later, the purple light inside the nether portal twisted again. A human figure tumbled out, crawling and rolling, curling up in a corner and convulsing violently. It was Cashin. He was still hugging that chicken tightly in his arms. At this moment, where was his previous arrogant attitude? His face was completely devoid of color, his entire body soaked in sweat, and his eyes darted around frantically out of extreme terror. His throat let out a roar like a broken bellows. Fire, it's all fire. Demons, pig demons holding golden swords everywhere. No, I don't want to stay in hell. Elwyn gasped from the side, whispering to Brum. The abyssal lake of fire. It specifically burns murderers and arsonists. It seems my guess was correct. Job-changed villagers are protected by MC rules and can survive entering the nether. And that chicken, being a real-world creature, didn't burn to death either. Since that was the case, it was time to step onto the field myself. Brum, stand guard here. Scarface, you're coming with me. I grabbed Scarface by the back of his neck, lifting the pillager who was already paralyzed with fear, and took large strides right into the purple curtain of light. My vision instantly twisted, and an intense feeling of weightlessness swept over my entire body. When I opened my eyes again, an extremely violent, scorching aura hit my face. As far as the eye could see, there was deep red netherrack. The sky was filled with thick, dark red smoke. Dozens of meters below our feet was a boundless ocean of lava, bubbling with deadly, high-temperature gas. Unextinguishable hellfire danced madly on the surrounding rocks, letting out a piercing, burning sound. Not far away, a few rotting zombified piglins holding golden swords were wandering aimlessly. This is the nether. Ah, it burns. It burns so much. Before I even started exploring, Scarface beside me suddenly erupted into a pig's laughtering scream. He frantically scratched at his throat, his face extremely twisted. The nether's high temperature instantly evaporated his sweat, and the toxic sulfur gas was aggressively destroying his lungs. Clearly, an ordinary human who hadn't undergone a job change simply couldn't withstand the extreme environment of the nether. I looked coldly at him rolling on the ground. So noisy. Shut up. Scream one more time, and I'll kick you into the lava right now. I pulled out my diamond axe and threatened coldly. The move was extremely effective. Scarface bit his lip so hard it bled, forcefully holding back his screams, though his body was still spasming wildly. I turned around, pulled out cobblestone, and quickly built a safe house, sealing the entrance with an iron door, just in case a piglin decided to take a stroll into the overworld. With everything ready, I looked at the still shivering Cashin I had dragged him back in. Put your brother on your back and follow me closely. If you fall, there won't even be ashes left of you. I pulled out cobblestone and started bridging a 2-block-wide suspended pathway over the edge of the cliff, heading deep into the lava sea. For absolute safety, I held down the sneak key, crouching the entire time. That way, even if I clung to the very edge of the block, I would absolutely never fall off. Cashin, carrying the painfully convulsing Scarface, stepped tremblingly onto the cobblestone I had just placed. Looking at the bubbling lava sea beneath his feet, he was scared completely out of his wits. He even briefly entertained the thought of pushing me off, but ultimately didn't dare to make a move. After all, in his eyes, I was a god who could take a casual stroll through hell. Just as we crossed the lava sea, the surrounding environment suddenly underwent a bizarre change. The violent dark red fog quickly receded, replaced by a spine-chilling ash-blue hue. The particles in the air turned into a dead grayish white. Scarface, who had been smoking from the heat just moments ago, suddenly started shivering violently like he had malaria, locking his arms tightly around Cashin's neck. Cold? It's so cold. Boss, where are we? The instant switch from extreme heat to extreme cold completely shattered Scarface's sanity. Cashin struggled to raise his head, following Scarface's gaze forward. The next second, his pupils shrank violently, his legs gave out, and he dropped straight to his knees right on the bridge. Ahead of them was a brown canyon suspended in the void. Ghostly blue soul fire burned silently on the rock walls. Massive, bone-white skeleton fossils, looking like ancient behemoths, lay crisscrossed across the terrain. And deep within that cyan mist, several massive, white, blocky monsters with hollow eye sockets and twisted faces ghasts were slowly floating through the sky, occasionally letting out shrieks that would tear your liver and gall bladder apart. Not only that, but among the blue flames, pale skeletons holding bows and arrows were wandering aimlessly. The abyssal underworld. It really is the Grim Reaper's underworld. Cashin's voice was hoarse. He had completely broken down. I ignored them and kept mining downward, avoiding the line of sight of the ghasts above, and dug directly into the bottom pathways of the Soul Sand Valley. The moment my foot stepped onto the soul sand, a distinct sluggish feeling traveled up from the soles of my feet. I casually placed down a torch. The moment the firelight illuminated the area, the texture of the ground became completely clear. Those weren't grains of sand at all. It was countless twisted, agonizing human faces. They were frantically rolling on the surface of the sand layer, opening their black hole-like mouths, letting out silent wails, trying to crawl out from underground, only to be violently dragged back down by an invisible force. They're all the souls of the dead. Cashin looked at the ghostly faces grabbing at his ankles, feeling like he was completely surrounded by imprisoned souls. His extreme terror finally breached its breaking point. With a thud, Scarface on his back rolled his eyes back and simply fainted from sheer terror. Lord Silas, I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Cashin knelt on the ground covered in phantom faces, frantically kissing my boots, crying bitterly. I beg you, please don't leave me here. I will atone. I'm willing to be the lowest tier serf to atone for my sins. Seeing him wetting his pants like this, I snorted coldly. Breaking down already? I haven't even taken you guys to fight the Wither yet. Soon, I dug to the end of this area. An extremely thin wall flashing with faint light blocked our path. This was the netherworld border wall. Throw that chicken out, I ordered. Cashin scrambled to throw the chicken out of the light wall. With a miserable cluck, the moment the chicken passed through the light wall, its body instantly went stiff, completely unable to move. I narrowed my eyes, looking at Cashin. Now, stick your left hand out. Cashin swallowed hard, closed his eyes, and with a look of facing certain death, stretched his hand outside the light wall. In front of the nether border wall, Cashin reached his left hand out of the light wall. The rules of extreme cold instantly froze his arm. The survival laws of ordinary creatures and job-changed villagers outside the border were about to lay all their cards on the table for me. So, this is what happens when you fall outside the rules. Looking at Cashin, who was shivering and had "I wanna live" written all over his face, I directly pulled out a brand new enchanted diamond helmet from my inventory and tossed it over. Put it on and try. With a dull thud, the helmet hit the ground. Cashin bent over, digging his fingers hard under the rim of the helmet. His face turned red, the veins on his forehead popped, but he couldn't move it a single millimeter. Obviously, it was a helmet forged from 5 high-density diamonds. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to lift it. Cashin was scared like a quail, terrified I'd punish him. I waved my hand, telling him to place his hand on the helmet and silently chant use in his mind. The next second, the diamond helmet vanished into thin air. Lord, it's gone. Cashin touched his head in panic. Don't worry about it. Now step outside the barrier. He gritted his teeth, squeezed his eyes shut, and charged through the nether border's light wall. As the cold wind swirled, he suddenly opened his eyes, his face full of disbelief. My lord is merciful. It's not as cold as before. Just as I thought, the fire protection enchantment effect kicked in. And as long as villagers equip armor via willpower, they can ignore the weight, and the gear will be completely invisible. This is the absolute perfect stealth assassin Gajir. In the future, if anyone dares to mess with my villagers, they'll absolutely get the crap beaten out of them by a bunch of civilians wearing invisible enchanted diamond armor. Just as I was calculating this in my head, a muffled whimper suddenly came from the side. Turning my head, my scalp went numb. That pillager named Scarface had half his body dragged into the soul sand. On the surface of the soul sand, countless pale, emaciated ghost hands had drilled out like venomous snakes, tightly wrapping around his limbs. A dozen hands were clamping over his mouth, forcefully dragging him down. I took a quick step forward, grabbed Scarface by the back collar, and violently yanked upward. Those ghost hands were torn right off, turning into black pixel fragments in midair and vanishing without a trace. The ghost faces on the soul sand let out silent wails, staring greedily at Scarface, but not daring to step half a pace closer to me. I tried sticking my hand out, and those ghost hands instantly scurried back into the blocks like mice seeing a cat. TCH, a bully mechanic monster that only picks on the weak. Scarface collapsed on the ground, lips purple, looking like he was about to breathe his last. I pulled out a bucket of milk and poured it down his throat, then shoved a handful of cookies over. If you don't want to die, swallow all of it. Cookies went down, HP went up. The frostbite on Scarface's arms healed at a visible rate. Tears streamed down his face as he frantically crossed himself to thank me for his grace. Test over, prepare to head back. The nether survival mechanics were figured out. There was no need to stay in this hellhole any longer. I had Cashin put the weak-kneed Scarface on his back and we retraced our steps. Just as we walked out of the tunnel, an extremely piercing cat-like screech suddenly came from above. Whoa! Looking up, a white blocky monster, a full 3 to 4 meters tall, was floating in midair with its eyes closed. Aghast, the massive oppressive presence instantly crushed the psychological defenses of the two pillagers. Cashin's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees with a thud, his crotch instantly soaking wet. Lord, my legs won't move. I raised my shield, pulled out my iron sword, and stared dead at the ghast in the sky. Surprisingly, this big guy floated around for ages but didn't even open its eyes to look at me. Turned neutral? Do monsters inside the border lose their active aggro mechanics? No, I had to test it to the end. I immediately pulled out a crafting table, crafted a wooden bow and a few arrows right on the spot, and shoved them into Cashin's hands. You, shoot it. Cashin's face turned green. He cried with a trembling voice, Lord, I don't dare. You dared to shoot at me, but you don't dare shoot this big plastic bag? Stop talking nonsense. If you miss, I'm throwing you into the lava. Cashin gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and violently released the bowstring. Whoosh! A direct hit. The ghast instantly went berserk. It violently opened its blue dread eyes, opened its abyssal maw, and let out an ears-hattering shriek. A massive flaming fireball tore through the air, smashing straight toward Cashin. It's over, it's over, it's over. Cashin hugged his head, waiting for death. I sneered, raised my shield, and stepped forward to block. Bang! Just like playing ping pong, the fireball deflected perfectly perfectly, smashing back into the ghast's face at an even faster speed. Accompanied by a shrill scream, this massive behemoth exploded into a puff of white smoke in midair, turning into ashes. Cashin was completely dumbfounded. He looked at the ashes on the ground, then looked at me, swallowing hard. In his mind, I was probably already a living god more terrifying than the Grim Reaper himself. You two roll back first. I couldn't be bothered with him and sent them back to the overworld first. I stayed in the nether and mined a stack of glowstone dust and magma blocks. With magma blocks and soul sand, I could build water elevators in the village later. When I finished mining the materials and stepped back through the purple portal to the overworld, the scene in front of me completely threw me off. Outside the portal, Brum and Elwyn had white cloth bands tied around their heads. They were leading a group of fully armed militia, looking tragic and heroic, getting ready to charge into the portal. Arthur was beside them, desperately trying to hold them back. The moment Brum saw me come out, his eyes widened massively, and he yelled in wild joy, "Lord Silas, you're not dead." My face was covered in black lines. "You're the one who's dead. What are you doing? Forming a raid group to go soak in the Hell Hot Springs?" Brom's face turned red as he stammered out an explanation. It turned out that after Cashin and Scarface came out first, Scarface was directly driven mad by the horrors of hell, crying and laughing. That dog Cashin couldn't keep his mouth shut and told them I might have died in there and wasn't coming back. When the guys heard that, they immediately organized a suicide squad to go into hell to fish me out. I speechlessly rubbed my temples. I stepped forward and patted Elwyn heavily on the shoulder. "Stop worrying for nothing. I told you on the first day, I will always be here." Elwyn shuddered, his eyes slightly red, and he placed his hand heavily on his chest. "Yes." I turned to look at Cashin, who was shrinking in the corner, frantically trying to lower his presence. I ordered expressionlessly, "Lock him in the main prison. If he dares say one more word, throw him down to feed the zombified piglins." Just then, a scout rushed over like lightning, dropping to one knee. "Lord Silas, we spotted a group of pillagers to the north. They have weapons, and the Baron's city guards are chasing them from behind." Finally, some action. My eyes lit up. I had been doing infrastructure building for the past few days, and the village had been so peaceful we didn't even have a target to test the defense system on. "Which village were they herded to?" "As per your orders, we drove away all the block animals in advance and lured them all the way to Stonefield Village." Stonefield Village, a perfectly ordinary village with hardly any defenses. This was an absolute golden opportunity to test the Iron Golem natural spawning mechanic. In the game, when villagers face a fatal threat, an Iron Golem automatically spawns to protect the village. Let's see if it actually works in reality. Let's go. Time for a show. I hopped onto my horse and headed straight for Stonefield Village. At this moment outside Stonefield Village, Garth was leading dozens of pillagers, lurking in the woods like hungry wolves. He was a seasoned veteran with a knife scar across his face and sinister eyes. He had long realized this village was weird in this year of famine. The women in the village all had rosy complexions, and even more bizarrely, there wasn't a single young or middle-aged man in sight. "Boss, we checked it out. The men were all called away by the village chief to build roads in the next village. Now it's nothing but women, the old, the weak, and the sick." His underling Skinny Bill reported excitedly. "The gods are blessing us." Garth drew his broadsword, his face turning savage. "Brothers, charge in. Grain, cloth, copper coins, take it all." The dozens of pillagers charged into the village like wolves and tigers. Although the village women's faces paled, miraculously, they didn't scatter and flee. A few refugee men from out of town were so scared they squatted on the ground holding their heads, getting scolded by the village women for being cowards. But these men kept their heads down, gritting their teeth, refusing to say a word. No kidding. They were the militia I had planted to put on an act. Without my order to the death, they couldn't make a move even with a knife to their necks. The pillagers smashed and grabbed along the way, quickly setting their sights on the brand new church in the center of the village. "There's definitely treasure hidden inside. Search it," Garth roared, waving his sword. A few village women couldn't take it anymore. They grabbed pitchforks and wooden clubs, standing firmly in front of the church doors, their eyes red as they shouted angrily, "This is Lord Silas' sanctuary. Whoever dares enter, the Lord will absolutely not let you off." "The Lord? I am your Lord." A skinny monkey-like pillager grinned maliciously, raised his rusted iron sword, aimed it at the woman in the very front, Zelda, and slashed down viciously. The edge of the blade tore through the air, and the shadow of death instantly enveloped Zelda. She closed her eyes in despair. Clang! An ears-hattering sound of clashing metal echoed through the entire village. No blood splattered, no screams. Zelda only felt a gust of wind mixed with the smell of iron rust hit her face. Trembling, she opened her eyes, and her vision was instantly filled entirely by a towering white metal wall. A white steel giant, a full 3 meters tall with arms as thick as tree trunks, stood out of thin air in front of the church doors like a descending god. The pillager who swung the sword, his long sword had shattered into dozens of iron fragments flying everywhere. He was still frozen in his slashing posture, his eyes bugging out of his head, staring dead at the steel colossus in front of him like he was looking at a monster. What the hell is this thing?" Iron Golem, natural spawn successful. I was on my horse hiding in the shadows, watching with my blood boiling. If anyone tells me my villages are defenseless ever again, I'll let the Iron Golem teach them a lesson. Titan slowly lowered its head, its dark red electronic eyes locking onto the pillager. The next second, its massive steel right arm, weighing hundreds of pounds, brought with it a sonic boom that tore the air, smashing viciously into the ground at the bandit's feet. Boom! Dirt flew into the air, and a massive spiderweb-like crater was instantly smashed into the ground. The powerful shockwave instantly sent the pillager flying. One of his legs snapped on the spot, and he let out a pig's laughtering howl. Quiet, dead quiet. All the pillagers went crazy. Garth felt his scalp explode, and the blood in his entire body froze. His mind instantly flashed back to all the bizarre things on this journey. Animals that suddenly disappeared, villages that appeared out of nowhere, and this steel god that completely defied common sense. A miracle. This is a miracle. Garth's knees gave out, and he dropped to the ground with a thud, frantically crossing himself and praying toward the church, begging for mercy. My lord, spare my life. Lord Silas, spare my life. With the boss on his knees, the rest of the pillagers' psychological defenses completely collapsed. They dropped to their knees, praying frantically, trying to run. Too late. Those cowardly refugees who had just been squatting with their hands on their heads instantly tore off their disguises, pulled out wooden swords from their shirts, and charged forward with murderous intent. At the same time, dense footsteps echoed from the woods. Brum led hundreds of fully armed Dons keep militiamen, pouring out from all directions like troops descending from heaven. The crossbowmen in the front directly raised their loaded crossbows, their cold arrowheads locking dead onto all the pillagers trapped in the encirclement. The encirclement slowly split open to create a path. Riding my tall horse, I took my time walking into the center of the scene. From my high vantage point, I looked down at this group of bandits shivering like leaves. Garth secretly peeked up at me and was instantly struck by lightning. This noble on horseback actually looked exactly the same as the holy statue enshrined in the church. The real god had descended. After dealing with the scene, I threw these dozens of guys to Brum, telling him to escort them back to the Dawn's Keep dungeon. I strolled into the church myself and took a look at my wooden holy statue. The craftsmanship wasn't bad, and the facial features were somewhat similar. But why did this cross-legged meditation pose look exactly like a traveling bard? I turned to look at Arthur. Go back and tell that sculptor Toby. Silas himself want a custom order a figurine. Tell him to carve the most handsome one for me. He'll pay him with torches that never burn out. Arthur nodded blankly. Elwyn beside me had fanatical eyes. My lord, regarding the holy statue. Also, this subordinate wishes to write a biography for you on parchment, recording these miracles. Write whatever you want, just don't write me as one of those emotionless, pedantic old fogies. Let me see the first draft when you're done. I waved my hand, hopped back on my horse, and headed home. Nightfall, Dawn's Keep dungeon. In the dim prison, torches flickered. Garth and his underlings huddled in the corner, their faces full of despair. Hungry, so hungry. His underling Bill tremblingly pulled a dead mouse out of his shirt that he had picked up from a trap, wanting Garth to eat it raw to stave off the hunger. Right at that moment, footsteps came from outside the cell. The iron door slid open, and a maddeningly rich aroma drifted in. The militia responsible for delivering food walked in holding several large wooden basins. A full basin of braised fish meat, a basin of white bread, and a huge pot of steaming boiled eggs. The pillagers' eyes turned green with hunger. In this year of famine where people ate people and couldn't even gnaw on tree bark, they were actually giving prisoners fish meat and white bread. Eat, even if we die, it's worth it. The bandits lunged forward, frantically shoving food into their mouths. But Garth held his bowl, his hands trembling, tears falling into the noodle soup. This was absolutely a last meal. After eating tonight, they'd definitely be dragged to the gallows tomorrow morning. Stop thinking about it. This isn't some last meal. From the dark corner, a hoarse voice suddenly spoke. Garth turned around and saw an old man with a head of white hair and eyes as weathered as a dry well. It was Cashin. Cashin picked up a piece of fish meat with his chopsticks, sneering at Garth. For the sake of letting me eat fish meat, he'll give you the bottom line. Do you know where all this flour and fish meat comes from? The pillagers stopped moving and stared at him blankly, conjured out of thin air. Cashin pointed up at the ceiling. This lord doesn't need sacrifices. He can make wheat ripen instantly. He can fish live fish out of an empty pond. He is the god of this realm. Garth gasped, his scalp tingling. Then, how does the Lord plan to deal with us? At that exact moment, in the other corner of the cell, Scarface suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream, his hands flailing wildly in the air. Don't drag me. Let go. Ghost hands. It's all fire down there. Help me. That manic display made the hair on all the new bandits stand on end. Cashin closed his eyes, took a deep breath, his tone filled with a despairing coldness. I'm warning you guys. If Lord Silas interrogates you later, immediately drop to one knee and confess your sins. Absolutely do not beg for mercy or make excuses. He paused, staring dead into Garth's eyes, speaking word by word. Also, if you get the chance to go outside and see a door emitting purple light, no matter what sounds come from inside, even if it kills you, do not look inside. Inside the Dawn's Keep dungeon, Cashin finished warning the newly arrived pillagers, while the manic Scarface convulsed silently in the corner. Meanwhile, outside the cell, I was staring at the newly spawned villager trading interface, displaying the nuclear-friendly smile of a capitalist. Since the food for these labor camp prisoners is so good, It's about time I arranged some 007247 mining blessings for them. Early the next morning, I strolled over to the entrance of the Dawn's Keep prison. The iron door opened, and the newly captured pillager boss, Garth, led his men to stand up perfectly straight in unison. This guy had some skills. He didn't drop to his knees begging for mercy and wailing like the other idiots. Instead, he dropped to one knee, placed his right hand on his chest, and his eyes were resolute. Our sins are heavy, and we are willing to accept any punishment. We only beg the Lord to leave us a way to live, to give us a chance to atone. Good attitude and quick on his feet. Managing to keep his entire crew alive under the hands of the iron golem made him a talent. I pointed to the nether portal next to us, flashing with bizarre purple light, my tone calm. Go inside and stay for a full 2 minutes. This is the price for you pillaging the villages. To prevent these mortals from being instantly one-shot by the nether's toxic gas, I specifically added a reminder. After you go in, immediately take off your rough linen clothes and stuff them into the door cracks to seal them. Be quick about it. Garth didn't hesitate for a second and took the lead in stepping into the purple curtain of light. The moment his vision twisted, the terrifying heat waves of the nether slammed into them like physical objects. Garth felt like every breath was inhaling burning razor blades. His lungs instantly caught fire. Enduring the agonizing pain, he tore off his clothes and desperately blocked the door cracks. But through the gaps, he saw the twisted world outside. A boiling lava sea, a dark red sky, and bizarre wandering monsters. Garth's scalp exploded. This wasn't some punishment room at Althei's, was a literal abyssal purgatory. The underlings behind him screamed continuously from the burns, clawing at the door like madmen. Boss, let us out. It's definitely cooler outside. I beg you, get back here. All of you. Garth desperately blocked the door, a beast-like roar coming from his throat. Whoever dares to go outside is dead. The 2-minute countdown ended. I snapped my fingers. Brum took large strides into the portal and dragged out this group of pillagers, who were nearly roasted into beef jerky, like dragging dead dogs. Garth was the last to crawl out. His entire body was bright red, and he weakly collapsed at my feet, his voice trembling. Thank you, Lord Silas, for sparing our lives. Please give us your orders. This wave of Hell Boot Camp was a perfect 10-10. I nodded in satisfaction. Go back and rest. Over the next few days, Brum will take you to other villages to fake being pillaged. When you see the white iron golems come out, you know what to do. Do a good job, and he'll make sure you have all the food you can eat. Having sorted out this batch of professional extras, I took Internal Affairs Officer Elwin and headed toward the Artisan's Hall, preparing to grind out an iron pickaxe with the Silk Touch enchantment. On the way, I asked Elwin a question. Elwin, do you think I should slowly farm and build up my base, or should I just stir this kingdom into a complete mess? Elwin smiled. My lord, you already have the answer in your heart. Exactly. I didn't want to play it safe anymore. The Roland kingdom was rotten to its core. I might as well give it a push. Make the arrangements. Expand the crossbowman squad. Build border watchtowers in all directions. Send people to Iron Guard City and the surrounding territories to spread my faith everywhere. I slammed the gavel right then and there, launching the surround the cities from the countryside strategy. Elwin immediately dropped to one knee to accept the order. During our casual chat, I learned that Toby the carpenter in the city was now carving my holy statues every day, and his orders were backed up for 2 months. I turned right to Arthur and ordered, go pay him a visit. Tell him this is an exclusive custom figurine ordered by me personally. Tell him to use the best oak to carve me one. Cut the line. They'll pay him with torches that never burn out. While Arthur and I were calculating how to sneak out of the city for some wild exploration, Elwin, whom I had sent to Iron Guard City to play salesman, was insanely boosting his score. At this moment, inside the grand hall of the Iron Guard City castle, the atmosphere was so oppressive it was dripping water. The new Baron, Monroe, was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. The previous lord's corruption had sparked a riot, the city was breached, the granaries were looted clean, and the autumn taxes couldn't be collected at all. He was facing a certain death scenario. Sitting across from him was the head of the Monopoly Merchant Guild, Sir Finn. These blood-sucking merchants had noses sharper than hounds. Taking advantage of the Baron having no way out, he demanded an exorbitant price. Lord Monroe, I can help you fill all the tax deficits. The condition is simple. I want the absolute monopoly over the spice and salt trade for all of Iron Guard City and its surrounding territories. Monroe gritted his teeth so hard they almost cracked. Handing the salt trade over to these vampires meant tens of thousands of serfs in the city would be driven to death. But what choice did he have? Just as Finn was swirling his red wine glass, wearing a disgusting I've got you beat smirk on his face, Elwin, who was sitting to the side, picked up his wooden cup and let out a disdainful sneer. A Merchant Alliance? What a massive appetite. I thought you had some real capital, but you're bringing out this pathetic amount of gold coins to embarrass yourself? Finn frowned, his face full of contempt. You, a wandering scholar from God knows where, what gives you the right to spout such nonsense here? Elwin didn't even bother giving him a second glance. He turned directly to Monroe, his voice resolute. Lord Baron, within 7 days, I will cover all your gold coin deficits and fill the castle's surplus granaries. Furthermore, I will take care of the rations and livelihoods of all the refugees outside the city. Finn immediately laughed out loud. Shameless boasting. Do you think the taxes of Iron Guard City are just a few broken copper coins? Just you? The corner of Elwyn's mouth curled into a mocking smile, and he slowly spat out a single sentence. I brought a small gift. It's parked right outside the castle gates. Whether this deal goes through or not, I'm giving it all to the Baron for free. Just consider it making a friend. Half believing and half doubting, Monroe immediately shot a look at the Knight Commander. Less than half a cup of tea later, the Knight Commander ran back into the hall like a madman, his iron helmet crooked from running, so excited he was trembling all over. My lord, 20 carriages. 20 full carriages of pure white refined flour. They're all parked right outside. What? Monroe and Finn exclaimed at the exact same time. A full 80 barrels of premium fine flour. In this cannibalistic year of great famine, this was absolutely a massive fortune that could buy half the city. And this person in front of them didn't even blink, giving it away for free. Finn violently gripped his wine glass. His face turned the color of pig liver, and his hands shook uncontrollably. Elwyn elegantly stood up and smoothed out his linen cloak. My condition is very simple. I want to fund the renovation of the old church in the city, and while I'm at it, add a holy statue of our Lord Silas inside. After saying that, Elwyn didn't even give Finn a proper look. He turned and walked away with large strides. Pure, absolute dominance through overwhelming power, saying even one more word would be a waste of saliva. Finn completely lost his mind. He fled the castle in humiliation. In a deserted alley, he trembled with rage, extremely venomous malice flashing in his eyes. A fake, freeloading heretic god dares to cut off my merchant guild's path to wealth? Once they build that statue, they'll find a dark, windy night and smash it to pieces. He had absolutely no idea that what he was messing with was a Minecraft player with an infinite inventory panel. Meanwhile, at Dawn's Keep, carrying a backpack full of supplies and holding an enchanted diamond axe, I took Arthur and activated stealth mode. I had no choice. Right now, in the eyes of my subjects, I was a living savior. If I walked just a little too far, they'd get so anxious they'd form a raid group to fish me out of hell. If I wanted to go out, I had to sneak like a thief. We sneaked all the way to the blind spot of the towering megalithic city wall. I didn't take the city gates. Instead, I directly pulled out an iron pickaxe and went to town on the thick cobblestone wall. In a few swings, I dug out a massive hole, crawled out, and then backhand placed the blocks back to seal it. Perfect prison break. The world outside the border was completely bizarre and dazzling. On the drought-stricken plains, scrawny real-world wild hares were nibbling on grass, while right next to them, the blocky square sheep spawned by MC mechanics were wandering aimlessly. In the sky, several vibrantly colored, pixelated parrots were flying mixed in with real-world sparrows. I immediately pulled out an empty map, right-clicked to activate it, and marked down the coordinates. Next time I bring enough seeds, I absolutely have to tame a few parrots. As long as these things are a certain distance away from the player, they trigger a forced teleportation. It's basically a living spatial magic marker. We roamed the outside world for a full 4 hours. The sky didn't fall and the terrain didn't collapse. It seemed the real world's compatibility with my MC domain was getting stronger and stronger. The sky grew dark, and my hunger bar was dropping a bit too fast. Arthur set up camp. I casually slapped down a campfire on the ground, then pulled out oak logs and planks, doing some crazy movement. In less than 5 minutes, an exquisite wooden house with a roof and windbreak walls rose from the ground. Arthur wasn't idle either. He set up an iron pot, poured in clean water, pulled out a few giant red mushrooms, some Mushroom Town specialty, and then pulled out a wild snake he had caught with a net during the day. He skinned it, gutted it, and threw the snake pieces in with the red mushrooms for a stew. Combined with the black pepper and vanilla spices Aunt Mary had specially prepared for me, that aroma could literally bring the dead back to life. As for the snake being venomous, are you kidding me? Under the MC Constitution, even if it's lethal poison, downing a bucket of milk clears it instantly. Once the soup was done, I couldn't wait. I picked up the wooden bowl and took a massive gulp. The snake meat was stewed so soft it fell off the bone, melting in the mouth. The mushrooms soaked up the savory meat broth, paired with the unique spice blend. Absolutely incredible. This is what you call an imperial chef. Get me another bowl. I handed the empty bowl over. Right as I spoke, dense footsteps suddenly came from the darkness in the distance. Over 100 blurry figures were rapidly approaching the campfire. My eyes turned cold. I instantly pulled out my crossbow, arrow loaded. Halt! What's your business? Lord Silas, don't shoot, it's us. The leader rolled and crawled into the firelight, sweating profusely. It was Willie, the trusted aide of the wandering black market merchant, Alaric. I lowered the crossbow, my eyes lighting up. Did you bring Master Albert? Willie's face froze, his sweat pouring down even harder. Wiping his forehead, he stammered, We brought him, but because he absolutely refused to come to the rebel-infested borders, we just directly kidnapped him. I almost spat out my snake soup. You guys literally kidnapped the top mechanical scholar in the kingdom. The crowd parted to the left and right, and 2 burly men escorted a middle-aged scholar in front of me. His clothes were messy, but his back was straight, and his eyes revealed an unyielding sharpness. His brows were filled with wisdom and arrogance. This person was exactly the absolute legend who wrote the masterpiece of engineering and mechanics, denounced as a heretic by the Orthodox Church. Albert coldly sized me up. On the way here, he had heard enough of these smugglers bragging about my miracles, but he didn't believe a word of it. In his eyes, I was just a cult leader using parlor tricks to deceive serfs. He spoke directly, his tone tough. You need not say much. Give me a few days, let me see this oak village of yours. If you are truly a fraud deceiving the masses, I, Albert, would rather die than build siege engines for you. A scholar's backbone is extremely stiff, and I love tough bones the most. I didn't take his bait. I casually pulled out a dozen MC cookies from my system inventory. Hungry? Eat something first. I tossed the cookies to Albert, Willie, and the rest. Albert stared dead at my completely empty hands, and his expression finally changed. He didn't see any hidden bags on me at all. High-tier spatial magic? He muttered to himself. With extreme caution, he took a tiny, testing bite of the cookie. The chocolate chips mixed with the sweet aroma of wheat exploded on his tongue. The next second, Albert completely froze. He felt a ridiculously tyrannical force instantly fill his entire body. The muscle soreness from the long journey was wiped away in an instant, and his bottomed-out stamina was forcefully maxed out in a single second, making him feel 10 years younger. No bitter taste of alchemy potions, no stinging pain of magic backlash, just a rule-bending power that violated all medical and physical common sense. Albert held the remaining half of the cookie, his hands beginning to shake uncontrollably. He stared dead at me, breathing heavily like a bellows. In the wilderness, the campfire flickered. The kingdom's top scholar, Albert, stared dead at the half-eaten chocolate cookie in his hand, feeling his stamina instantly max out. His decades of classic theological worldview were violently shattering. Is this the lost art of a grand mage, or the creation of a living god? Albert stared at the cookie, his hands trembling like a sieve. He didn't even care about his manners, panting heavily. No medicinaltas, no stimulación. Just swallowing this tiny piece of dough erased his exhaustion and restored his strength. I couldn't be bothered to explain MC regeneration mechanics to him. I casually threw the rest of the basket of cookies to Willie. Split these with the brothers. Remember, take him to Dawn's Keep. Don't go around saying you saw me tonight. Instructions given, I took Arthur and turned to walk into the night, continuing my off-grid survival test. And Albert, escorted by Willie, walked through the night toward the most absurd miracle he would ever see in his life. In the dark of night, a towering wall blocked everyone's path. The wall was several yards wide. Looking up, you couldn't even see the top, as if it sliced heaven and earth apart. Albert rushed forward, using his fingers to claw at the mottled stone seams. No clay, no lime mortar. These massive stones were perfectly fused together. Not even a speck of stone dust could be scraped off. Towering and unyielding, this was absolutely not the work of mortals. Walking through the iron gates, dozens of houses hollowed out from giant red mushrooms greeted his eyes. The militia guards led them into guest rooms. Albert lay on a wooden bed padded with pure white wool, turning his head to stare dead at the torch on the wall. For a whole night, that torch didn't drip a single drop of grease, didn't shorten by a single millimeter. It just quietly kept burning. He climbed out of bed, walked outside, and stared at the 2-block-wide water pool. The water flow was suspended in midair, crazily pouring down. The pool below was clearly already full, yet not a single drop of water spilled out. Water that never runs dry? What kind of forbidden magic is this? Early the next morning, Albert ran to the farmlands outside the city with dark bags under his eyes. He grabbed an old serf wearing a straw hat and insisted on seeing how they farmed. The old farmer cheerfully took out a handful of seeds and scattered them on the ground. Then he grabbed a handful of white bone meal and threw it on the dirt. Whoosh! In less than 7 seconds, a golden, heavy stalk of wheat sprouted and ripened right in front of Albert's very eyes. A whole year's harvest compressed into a few breaths. Albert's worldview completely shattered. He stumbled through the mushroom town market. Hot bread, thick soup, roast methi aroma was everywhere. Children holding snacks ran wildly in the streets, followed by a white iron golem over 3 meters tall. No bandits, no famine. Everyone's face was written with hope for tomorrow, laughter and joy. This era of prosperity, which he hadn't even seen in the Royal Academy of the capital, had actually been realized in this remote wasteland border. Master Scholar, want a piece of flatbread? A rugged man smilingly shoved a freshly baked hot bread into his hands. It's free. Lord Silas gave us this life, we have to know how to share. Biting into the hot bread, Albert's eyes teared up. The rotten roots of the kingdom might truly only be pulled out by this living god. Just then, an agonizing cracking sound suddenly echoed from the sky. Pitch-black rifts spread crazily across the heavens. The market fell instantly silent. All the villagers looked up in terror, thinking divine punishment had arrived. This wasn't divine punishment, of course. This was just me walking too far away. Right now, I was standing in the wilderness outside the border, frowning as I watched my health bar plummet. My lord, the sky is falling again. Let's go back quickly. Arthur backed away in terror. Don't panic, it's a minor issue. I calmly pulled out a golden carrot and took 2 bites. Crunch, crunch. The moment my hunger bar maxed out, my HP stopped dropping, and the rifts in the sky rapidly healed. I figured out the mechanic. As long as I'm outside the border, the world continuously takes damage, but as long as I spam eat golden carrots to heal, it's equivalent to putting an infinite shield on this domain. This meant I could totally travel far away, even go shopping in Iron Guard City. Fully fed, I casually grabbed a brightly feathered parrot from a tree. This little thing had single-digit IQ. Standing on my shoulder, all it did was desperately mimic the low growls of zombies. It annoyed me so much I wanted to throw it into a pot for stew, but considering its MC pet traits of immunity to damage and forced teleportation, it barely counted as a mascot, so I brought it back to the city. The moment I walked to the door of the Lord's manor, I saw a familiar figure. Albert straightened his slightly worn robes, keeping his posture perfectly upright. The moment he saw me, he dropped heavily to one knee and placed his right hand over his heart. I am Albert. I have seen Lord Silas. If the Lord will take me in, I am willing to paint the ground with my brain and blood, and I will not hesitate. Nailed it. The #1 tech genius in the world has joined the roster. I suppressed the wild joy at the corner of my mouth and waved my hand, feigning calmness. No need to be so polite. I'm just starting out here, and there's a lot to be rebuilt. What can you do? Albert's eyes lit up, his entire being radiating confidence. Papermaking, ink making, silkworm rearing, weaving, smelting iron and copper, oil pressing, and winemaking. I have dabbled in all of them. If the Lord requires firearms and cannons, as long as there are enough materials, I can also improve and cast them. Oh, way too OP. This one guy is worth an entire military factory. I immediately dropped the first massive bomb. Master Albert, have you heard of cement? Limestone, clay, sand, and water. Once it dries, it's harder than stone. Albert frowned, instantly connecting it to medieval building materials. Could it be similar to ancient Roman volcanic ash concrete? But that material requires volcanic ash, and the ratio process is very complicated. It doesn't need to be that complicated. Just add water and mix it. I gave him the general recipe and left the specific ratios for this research maniac to figure out. Turns out, this old man was even crazier than I thought. His eyes glowed. Not only did he accept the task of developing cement, but he also made a request that made my scalp tingle. My lord, I heard there is a door in the city that leads straight to the legendary hell. I wish to personally go to hell for an on-site field investigation. I hope the Lord will grant this. He even dares to do scientific research in hell? He truly lives up to the title of the madman who wrote the masterpiece of engineering and mechanics. I immediately nodded and agreed. Once he completes his job change, it'll take him down there to mine gold. While I was enthusiastically grinding my base building, Iron Guard City was being pushed to the brink of absolute despair. Evening, City Guard Barracks. Knight Commander Wulfric dragged his exhausted body back to the camp. He was a tough guy who had personally experienced the Hell Day trip, and now, to atone for his sins, he led his troops out every day to crazily slaughter pillagers. As soon as he sat down, Baron Monroe called him over. On the table were a few pathetic plates of vegetarian dishes, hard dark bread, and clear water. A dignified Lord Baron, as poor as a church mouse. Monroe picked up a cup of cheap ale, his face full of sorrow. Wulfric, those heretics are bullying us too much. They actually demanded to stuff a statue of their wild god into the old church before they'd give us those 20 carts of fine flour. Tell me, where did they get so much grain? They definitely robbed it. Wulfric's hand, holding his wooden cup, violently trembled. 20 carts of fine flour? A wild god statue? He knew exactly who those people were. Wulfric put down his cup, stared dead at Monroe, and lowered his voice. Lord Baron, have you ever considered that grain? They conjured it out of thin air themselves? Monroe looked at Wulfric like he was looking at a madman. Knight Commander, have you drunk too much? The kingdom has been in a severe drought for 3 years. The riverbeds are dry. Where's the water to farm? Are you telling me the god of light descended? Wulfric abruptly stood up, his fists clenched tight. I know my lord does not believe it, but that is the truth. If my lord does not believe it, go to Oak Village yourself and look at that giant stone wall that touches the sky. Monroe's face turned completely cold. He thought the Knight Commander must have colluded with the rebels to even make up such ridiculous lies. When views differ, even half a sentence is too much. Knowing he couldn't explain it, Wulfric could only sigh, place his hand on his chest, and take his leave. Before he left, he dropped one last line. My lord, try your best to meet their demands. It's best to place that statue in the main hall. The grain in their hands is far beyond your imagination. Watching Wulfric's back, Monroe snorted coldly. He turned and went straight to the old church, finding the parish priest. Father, I've decided. Bring that wild god statue into the main hall. The priest was so scared he almost dropped his Bible. Think twice, my lord. Inviting a wild god into the main hall. If the royal capital investigates, you won't be able to keep your title. In the history books, you'll leave a stench for 10,000 years and be sent to the heretic's burning stake. Monroe stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the dried-up land outside the church, his eyes revealing absolute resolve. I am the Lord of Iron Guard City. As long as I can get those 20 carts of flour and let the people of my city have a full meal, even if I have to go to the burning stake, I accept it. Monroe signed the guarantee and took on all the infamy, and my grain-dumping war officially began in this starving city. Noon, a street corner in the slums of Iron Guard City. Old Vic, a bottom-tier laborer, knelt on the freezing stone slabs, desperately kowtowing. Master manager, I beg you, pay me my wages. My kids at home are starving and rolling on the floor. The merchant guild manager, with a face full of vicious fat, sneered and threw down half a bag of copper coins. Paying in advance docs 30. Take it or leave it. Get lost. Old Vic's hands trembled as he tightly clutched those pitiful few copper coins. He rushed into the grain shop, but the grain he exchanged them for was pathetic. Grain prices had gone up again. Returning to his drafty, broken straw hut, his 4 Skynanbone's children looked at him eagerly. The youngest boy was crying from hunger. Old Vic bit his lip so hard that the taste of blood spread in his mouth. He looked at his slightly older eldest daughter, his voice trembling uncontrollably. Let's go. Dad will take you out for a walk. The eldest girl didn't cry. Sensibly, she held her dad's rough hand. She knew that on this trip out, she would be sold to the Lord's manor as a serf in exchange for grain. Only then could her little brothers survive. Father and daughter walked numbly down the street. Passing the church, a dull bell rang out. Old Vic stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, he saw a dilapidated shop that hadn't even hung up a signboard in a remote alley next to the church. Carriages were parked at the door, and several burly men were carrying sacks inside. Inside the shop, bulging sacks of flour were stacked all the way from the floor to the ceiling. Old Vic's eyes swept over the wooden sign at the door. His pupils instantly shrank to the size of pinpricks, and his breathing completely stopped. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was hallucinating from hunger. Written clearly on it was, pure white refined flour, 10 copper coins per pound. In this cannibalistic year of the Great Famine, this price was literally no different from giving it away for free. Old Vic's feet felt like they were moving on their own as he tremblingly stepped through the shop doors with his daughter. A militiaman disguised as a shop assistant warmly greeted them. Customer, looking to buy flour? Old Vic's throat tightened. Staring dead at that mountain of flour, tears burst from his eyes, and his voice was so shrill it changed pitch. See these flowers? Are they really for sale? Inside the nameless shop in the remote alley of Iron Guard City, driven to a dead end, Old Vic clutched the copper coins in his hand, looking at the pure white flour stacked to the ceiling and that glaring 10 copper coins per pound wooden sign. His tears of impending breakdown instantly burst like a broken dam. See these flowers? Are they really for sale? Customer, what are you saying? Do you think we put this flour out just for show instead of selling it? The militiaman disguised as an assistant grinned. Old Vic swallowed hard. 10 copper coins for a pound of pure white flour. Even if this price was multiplied by 10, he'd still think it was a steal. He didn't dare ask any more questions, terrified that one extra word would change the price. With trembling hands, he pulled out the remaining dozen copper coins from his pocket. This was his family's absolute last bottom line, originally intended to buy his soon-to-be-sold daughter her final last meal. Shopkeeper, I want to buy 1 pound. Old Vic cupped the 10 copper coins in both hands, his heart pounding like a drum. No problem. The assistant moved swiftly, scooping the flour onto the scale, packaging it securely, and handing it over. Your flour, hold it well. It really was 1 pound of pure white flour. Feeling the heavy weight in his hands, Old Vic's eyes instantly turned red. Like a madman, he slammed the remaining few copper coins onto the counter. His voice hoarse. Shopkeeper, all of this for flour. Can I? Yes. Buy as much as you want. Getting a few pounds of flour, Old Vic dropped to his knees with a thud, frantically crossing himself toward the assistant. The assistant grabbed him and pointed to the statue covered in red cloth behind the counter. Don't thank me. All this flour was bestowed by Lord Silas. If you want to thank anyone, thank the Holy Apostle. Holy Apostle, thank you, Holy Apostle, for saving my life. This commoner will worship Lord Silas for all eternity. Old Vic slammed his head onto the stone slab, making loud bangs, his forehead turning bloody red. He tightly hugged the flour to his chest and stumbled out of the alley. At the corner of the street, his starving Skynanbone's eldest daughter tugged at the corner of his clothes. Looking up timidly, she asked, Dad, do I not have to be sold to the manor anymore? Old Vic's nose stung. He pulled his daughter tightly into his arms, tears streaming down. Dad isn't selling you. I'd rather die than sell you. Let's go. Dad will take you home to eat. That night, long-lost laughter echoed from Old Vic's cramped, broken-down house. White flour paste went into the pot, and the starving children grabbed their wooden bowls, wolfing it down. With red eyes, Old Vic set an absolute rule for his whole family. From now on, the Vic family will only worship one god, and that is Saint Silas. And meanwhile, in the courtyard of the Finn Manor in Iron Guard City, the head of the Monopoly Merchant Guild, Sir Finn, was comfortably lying on a velvet sofa, enjoying a head massage from his maid. His trusted subordinate scrambled in to report, My lord, a new flour shop opened in the city, selling for only 10 copper coins a pound. All the poor mudlegs in the city are running to grab it. 10 copper coins? Finn abruptly sat up, his eyes wide. You didn't hear wrong? What's the background of that shop? We investigated clearly. It's run by a group of rebel pillagers from Oak Village outside the city. They believe in some faceless heretic wild god named Lord Silas. Hearing this, Finn instantly understood. He leaned back on his sofa, letting out an unbridled, manic laugh. I wondered what kind of god it was. Turns out it's just a bunch of brainless heretics. To buy people's hearts, they're even doing this kind of stupid, money-losing stunt. Do they think they can fill an entire city's stomach with that little bit of robbed grain? Finn's eyes suddenly turned sinister, the abacus in his mind clicking rapidly. 10 copper coins a pound. A barrel of flour is less than 2 silver coins. In this year of severe drought, as long as we hoard all this cheap flour dead in our hands, once the rebels' grain sells out, the price will instantly skyrocket dozens of times over. Pass down my word. Finn slammed the table, directly issuing an absolute kill order. Send our people to mix in with the commoners. Increase the buying price by 20, or even double it. Buy as much as they have. Also, starting today, dock 30 of the wages of all the laborers under us. Anyone who complains, tell them to get lost, squeezing the poor dry of their money, and then swallowing up all my grain. This blood-sucking capitalist combo move was indeed practiced. Too bad he messed with the wrong guy. Afternoon, by the lake outside Dawn's Keep. I was sitting on the grass, leisurely casting a fishing line. Elwyn stood behind me, reporting the movements of Finn in Iron Guard City with absolute clarity. Lord Silas, those merchant guild rich guys in the city are like mad dogs. The flour we shipped over, besides what the commoners bought to survive, the rest was all bought up at high prices and hoarded in their warehouses. I stared at the bobber on the lake and literally laughed out loud. Fighting a price war with me? Trying to blow up my inventory? That massive chest in my inventory filled with tens of thousands of stacks of wheat. Even if the whole city ate with their bellies open for 100 years, they wouldn't finish it. As long as I plant a seed and throw some bone meal, I can harvest a batch in 7 seconds. They like hoarding, huh? I reeled in my fishing rod, turned to look at Elwyn, my eyes giving a nuclear-friendly look. Then let's grant their wish. Take 30 of the stock from my personal warehouse and sell it to death. I want to drain every single silver coin in their hands. But my lord, they are buying with open arms. Couldn't we just crash the market? No, we can't just crash it. I raised a finger and wagged it. We do hunger marketing. Starting today, implement purchasing limits. Change it from per person limits to per household limits. The harder it is to buy, the more they'll think we're running out of grain, and the more they'll smash their pots and sell their iron to hoard it. When these corrupt merchants exchange their entire net worth for a pile of flour, only to finally realize the stuff can't be sold for a high price in Iron Guard City at all, their expressions will be absolutely priceless. As for the silver coins scammed from them, perfect for paying my workers to pave roads. Having given the instructions for this hyperdimensional economic warfare, I turned and headed to the blacksmith. Next up, I had to prepare for a tough fight. The Winter Solstice Festival is coming up. How can we have fireworks without gunpowder? I have to go to the nether and farm a few ghasts. Just as I walked to the nether portal, Albert was already waiting there, wearing his Scholar's Hall job hat. He was staring intently at a protruding obsidian block at the base of the frame. Master Albert, stop studying that broken rock. I walked up, pulled a brand new set of enchanted diamond armor from my inventory, and tossed it straight to him. Albert caught it clumsily. Following my instructions, he chanted use in his mind. The next second, this incredibly heavy set of diamond armor merged directly into his body, becoming completely invisible. Shocked, he touched his arm, casually picked up a sharp rock, and viciously stabbed his own palm. With a crack, the rock shattered on the spot, and his hand didn't even have a white mark on it. Invulnerable to blades and spears, yet light as a feather, Albert gasped. Lord Silas, does this divine armament have no restrictions? It does. It only works within my domain. The moment you step outside the border, it drops to the ground. I casually handed him a wooden kite shield. Let's go. Stick close to me. The lava in hell doesn't have eyes. The purple light curtain twisted. The weightlessness faded, and we stepped into the nether. The violent heat wave mixed with the pungent smell of sulfur hit our faces. Albert didn't roll on the ground in terror like the pillagers. Protected by the villager system, he only felt a bit stuffy. Standing on the suspended cobblestone bridge, his eyes stared dead at the boiling lava sea and the surrounding dark red netherrack. Suddenly, he stepped forward, reached out, and squeezed a piece of netherrack on the edge. The texture is soft and warm, with a faint pulse. Albert violently took 2 steps back, his pupils quaking, asking with a trembling voice, Lord Silas, these dark red stones as far as the eye can see resemble flesh and blood, and the sea of fire beneath our feet is like boiling blood. This legendary purgatory, could it be the internal remains of an ancient abyssal behemoth? I froze for a second. Bro, the official devs didn't even give this lore, and you, a top scientist, just headcanoned it into a Lovecraftian behemoth? But thinking about it carefully, the texture of netherrack really does look like chunks of meat. I played along and nodded. Pretty much. Let's go, head to the front. Walking on the narrow cobblestone bridge, surrounded by a bottomless sea of fire, Albert took a few deep breaths and suddenly stopped. Lord Silas, there is one thing I do not understand. I am but a heretic scholar rejected and wanted by the church. The things I study are viewed by others as useless, trivial tricks. How exactly did you know about me? I stopped walking and turned back to look at him. Because you went down in history. I smiled, my tone extremely calm. The masterpiece of engineering and mechanics. Hundreds of years in the future, every word of this book is considered a gem. And your name, Albert, is printed in the textbooks of every scholar. Albert's entire body trembled, his eyes snapping wide open. Went down in history. His lifelong ultimate dream actually came true. Before he could rejoice, I dumped a bucket of ice water right over his head. Unfortunately, the future rulers didn't value your book very much. Future rulers? Albert keenly caught that term, his face instantly turning deathly pale. The Roland kingdom fell? Yeah, it fell. Calculating the time, it's probably going to happen in about 10 years. I sighed. The king hangs himself in the castle. The barbarian tribes from the extreme north break through the gates, and the kingdom sinks. The southern nobles fight endlessly among themselves, and in the end, it rots completely to the core. 10 years. Albert felt like he was struck by lightning. He stumbled, almost falling off the cobblestone bridge into the lava. He gripped his shield tightly, his knuckles turning white, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The barbarians. How did the barbarians break through the desolate Great Wall of the North? They were let in by their own people. Albert lost his voice completely. His brain was spinning crazily, connecting all the clues together. The kingdom is about to be destroyed, barbarians taking over the central plains, and this young noble before him, with his heaven-defying means, infinite grain, and even the ability to open the abyssal gates of hell, actually knows the history of hundreds of years in the future like the back of his hand. An insanely crazy thought exploded in Albert's mind. No mistake, it all adds up. Lord Silas isn't some hidden master at all. He is a supreme god from hundreds of years in the future, reversing the river of time, returning to the Dark Ages. Everything he's doing, claiming land, building cities, hoarding grain, recruiting himmies, all to forcefully defy fate and stop the eternal catastrophe of the kingdom's fall. Lord Silas. Albert's eyes were bloodshot. He violently dropped to one knee on the cobblestone bridge, his voice choked with emotion but displaying absolute resolve. If my lord wishes to change the heavens and the earth, I, Albert, am willing to be the sharpest sword in my lord's hand. Looking at him, successfully convincing himself with this fanatical display, I nodded in satisfaction. This is the awakening a top-tier SSR unit should have. Get up. The Soul Sand Valley is just ahead. Passing through the fog, the eerie blue soul fire illuminated the canyon ahead. On the brown soul sand blocks, countless agonizing, twisted ghost faces were silently wailing and struggling. Looking at this terrifying scene, Albert's thirst for knowledge actually overpowered his fear. Lord Silas, these wandering souls everywhere, I want to try and see if I can communicate with them. Communicate? These aren't story NPCs. They're pure mechanic blocks. Before I could stop him, this hardcore old man directly took a step onto the soul sand, then silently chanted a command in his mind, making the hat symbolizing his villager job turn invisible. The moment he removed his villager status, the extreme survival laws of the nether slammed down on Albert like Mount Tai. The bone-piercing freezing wind instantly froze his marrow, and his lips turned purple at a visible rate. Hundreds, thousands of pale, skinny ghost hands reached out from the soul sand, tightly grabbing his ankles and calves, desperately dragging him into the underground. Cold. Albert couldn't even finish a complete sentence. Half of his calves were already submerged in the sand. His eyes bulged out, finally experiencing the absolute terror of death that comes from falling outside the rules. Just as he was about to be dragged into the abyss of eternal damnation, he violently used his willpower to re-equip his job hat. Villager protection mechanics instantly restored. The ghost hands acted like they had touched some absolute taboo. They froze, then frantically shrank back into the soul sand like they were electrocuted. Completely soaked in sweat, Albert collapsed on the cobblestone, gasping for air. I walked over, exasperated, and shoved 2 golden carrots at him. Eat, hurry up and refill your health bar. After eating the golden carrots, Albert's pale face finally regained its color. He wiped his cold sweat, his eyes becoming even more fanatical. Experiencing the boundary of life and death himself left him with absolutely zero doubts about my divine laws. Lord Silas, we can continue. He stood up, brushing off his robes. All right, see that big white block floating in the sky? I pulled out my bow, enchanted with power, eye, and infinity, aiming at the wandering ghast in the sky. Help me see if my shooting posture is correct. Albert took one look at my form and instantly turned into a strict drill instructor. Lord Silas, your grip is off. Bend your wrist naturally, relax your shoulders. Keep your body straight, apply force evenly, hold the bow properly, and ready the arrow calmly. Push forward, pull back, draw the bow fully, and the stance is complete. I adjusted my muscles according to his guidance. The player panel meant I felt absolutely no fatigue from drawing the bow. My strength was absolutely stable. Release. Whoosh. The first arrow grazed the ghast's tentacles and flew past. The ghast abruptly turned around, letting out a shrill shriek. Again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Once muscle memory kicked in, plus the buff from the power enchantment, my crosshair became increasingly terrifying. Headshot. The massive ghast exploded into a puff of smoke in midair, and gunpowder and gas tears dropped like rain. I emptied a full 3 stacks of arrows in hell, farmed half a stack of gunpowder, and only put my bow away when I had enough fun. Let's go. Time to go home and make fireworks. We passed through the portal and returned to the overworld. Outside the door, Elwyn was waiting for me holding a ledger. My lord, we've already mined a massive batch of limestone and clay from Iron Guard City. Elwyn couldn't suppress the smile at the corner of his mouth. Also, those rich merchants in the city have gone crazy. Not only did they rent out every single warehouse in the city to hoard our flour, but now they're even starting to sweep the market for wool. I let out a cold laugh. Good. They have money, I have grain. Let's see who gets stuffed to death first. Scene shift, Iron Guard City. Finn Menor. Monopoly boss Finn watched carriage after carriage of flour and will roll into his courtyard, laughing so hard the fat on his face jiggled. Hurry, bring it all in. Put it down gently. A trusted aide ran over, sweating profusely, reporting, "My lord, the warehouses in the east, west, and south markets are completely stuffed. Every single place in Iron Guard City that can block the rain has been rented out by the other guilds. No place to put it? Then stack it right here in the courtyard of my Finn Manor." Finn waved his hand, his aura heroic, looking at the mountains of flour as if he was looking at mountains of gold and seas of silver. He sat on his velvet high-back chair, raised his red wine glass, and laughed hysterically. "These idiot heretics, using robbed grain to sell cheap and buy people's hearts? I'm gonna drain them down to their underpants right now. Once the day comes when you run out of grain, they'll see what you used to stabilize the people." Ha 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 ha. Finn laughed until he was bending back and forth. He had absolutely no idea that what he was bankrupting himself to frantically buy up was nothing but a batch of basic resources that I could farm out of my crops in 7 seconds flat. Inside the Finn Manor, Finn looked at the mountains of flour and laughed at the sky, thinking he had monopolized the city's food lifeline. Meanwhile, on the walls of Dawn's Keep, I was holding the first batch of cement Albert had just mixed, looking toward the dirt road leading to Iron Guard City. Since the merchants have already transferred the road building funds over, then send the whole army out. Use this hyperdimensional cement to pave a road straight into Iron Guard City for me. 3 days before the Winter Solstice Festival, Dawn's Keep, holding a brand new velvet robe Arthur had just delivered, I changed out of the old clothes I had worn for a year and casually put on a half-face wooden mask. I flashed a pose in the bronze mirror. Handsome. The disguise was absolutely perfect. Nobody could tell who I was. Just so I could enjoy a good shopping trip today, I specifically had Elwyn order that all adult men in the city must wear masks today. As long as everyone is wearing one, I won't stand out. In real life, who stares closely at other people anyway? Everyone is just an NPC. I patted Arthur on the shoulder, sending him home to reunite with his family, and strolled into the market by myself. The market was buzzing with voices, vendors shouting from all sides. I darted over to a vendor selling honey-roasted apples, pulled out 4 copper coins, bought a skewer, and took a bite. Sweetness filled my mouth. Every few steps, I could see a man wearing a mask. Nobody gave me a second glance. Walking up to a stall selling amulets and holy paintings, I looked down and instantly froze. In that guardian painting, it had a blocky body, a big nose, it was pure white all over, and it had vines growing on it. Good heavens, this is literally a drawing of Titan. That big doofus. Seeing me space out, the vendor righteously tried to sell it to me, saying how incredibly strong the Titan giant god was, absolutely effective for guarding homes, and that this was the hottest selling item this year. Listening to him, I just shook my head. Hanging Titan's goofy face on my door would feel weird no matter how I looked at it. In the end, I pulled out money and bought a pair of old-school Paladin Roland and Galahad paintings instead. After taking the money, the vendor even tried to hustle me into buying a Lord Silas fishing portrait, saying that buying a holy painting came with a free prayer candle. Hearing that, I quickly waved my hands and slipped away from the stall, praying to myself, that image was too beautiful. I didn't dare imagine it. Having bought all the miscellaneous items for the year-end festival, I headed straight for the pastures. On the distant grassy plains, cows, sheep, chickens, and horses covered the mountains and plains. The 2 cows and sheep I brought back originally had multiplied into hundreds and thousands over the past year. The chickens were even crazier. The ground was littered with eggs, so many you literally couldn't pick them all up. I took off my mask and changed back to my usual outfit. The butcher squad recognized me at a glance and quickly ran over, putting their hands on their chests in a salute. Bring 2 cows over. With a wave of my hand, I crafted fences to trap the cows in the middle. Then, I pulled out an iron sword flashing with purple light from my inventory. This was the looting 3 iron sword I had made at the enchantment table. My strength buffs weren't enough and villagers couldn't lift diamond swords, so I could only enchant iron swords. Butcher Buck took the iron sword and struck down a cow in 4 swings. With a pop, 4 leather and 5 raw beef dropped on the ground. Awesome! Enchantments still work perfectly in the hands of villagers. The looting enchantment directly broke the drop limit. Now the production speed of leather armor was going to absolutely skyrocket. The militia squad was in desperate need of leather caps and boots. I handed out all the enchanted looting iron swords from my inventory, strictly warning them, from now on, when slaughtering livestock, you must use these swords. The final day of the famine year, the Winter Solstice Carnival night. The streets of Dawn's Keep were lined with torches and colorful banners. Tens of thousands of lights shone, and cheers rang out in unison. The subjects wore new clothes, their faces full of smiles. They were well-fed and warmly dressed, living a life that felt like a dream. And in front of my lord's cabin, wind lanterns swayed in the breeze, oak wreaths and night portraits hanging on the door. Holding my cat, Dream, I sat on a chair in front of the door and chugged down a whole bucket of milk. Every festival brings homesickness. I never expected ID directly transmigrate into the dark Middle Ages of another parallel world. Thud, thud, thud. Familiar earthquake-like footsteps arrived. Titan's massive blocky body appeared in front of me. Couldn't speak, it just pointed at the distant town, then at my cabin, and finally reached out to pat my head. Thanks, Titan. I patted its steel shoulder. Titan sat down quietly beside me. I planned to send Titan to school after the holidays. Iron golems might be dumb, but they have long lifespans. I wanted to see if I could train it to be a judge. Villagers always have conflicts, and if an absolutely neutral golem judges the cases, it would definitely be the fairest. I pulled out a bag of silver coins and shoved it into its hands as a year-end gift. After all, this big guy wasn't even a full year old yet. Just as I laid down on the grass to stretch my limbs, Arthur ran over, panting heavily. "My lord, Elwyn told me to give this to you." He unwrapped the red cloth in his hands. Inside was an extremely exquisitely crafted velvet robe, embroidered with dark patterns in gold and silver thread. This kid also mysteriously handed me a wooden carving. By the light of the wind lantern, I took a look. It was actually a human figurine he carved himself. The technique was extremely stiff, the eyes were carved crooked, but I could tell at a glance that he had carved me. "You carved this yourself?" I asked. Arthur nodded crazily, his eyes full of expectation. This kid was usually clumsy, so he definitely put a lot of effort into carving this thing. "Not bad. It has collection value." I casually stuffed it into my inventory, then pulled out a wooden bow flashing with purple light from my chest and handed it to him. "Take it. This bow is enchanted with power, I, and infinity. I'm leaving it in your care. As long as you have one arrow on you, you can shoot countless arrows out of thin air." Arthur was so excited his hands shook. He took the wooden bow, pulled it back empty, and an arrow materialized out of thin air. With a whoosh, it shot into the night sky. The next second, a roar shattered the silence. Fireworks rockets shot straight into the heavens, exploding in intertwining red and blue light against the night canvas. "Happy holidays!" Dawn's keep erupted in heaven-shaking cheers. Countless subjects shouted Lord Silas's name under the fireworks. The suffering of the old year completely vanished like smoke. After the holidays, the cheering faded, and everything went back on track. Holding an iron pickaxe enchanted with silk touch, I stood by the river, frowning. The little ice age was too cold, and the river water had frozen solid with thick ice. I swung my pickaxe and smashed a chunk of ice. A block-sized piece of ice dropped directly into my inventory. Perfect. The express lane needed exactly this. I tossed the iron pickaxes to the masons, putting them specifically in charge of mining ice blocks. Just as I finished giving the order, Elwyn ran over holding a dusty gray block. "My lord, Master Albert successfully made the cement." Looking at that solid cement brick, the corners of my mouth went up crazily. "Beautifully done. The work for relief program can begin. Send people to Iron Guard City. Start building the road immediately." Elwyn nodded and jotted it down, mentioning in passing, "My lord, those rich merchants in Iron Guard City have been squeezed dry. They're getting a little scared to keep buying our flour." I sneered. "These corrupt merchants are dreaming. Isn't our flour almost gone? Then hang up a sign purchasing limits." At this moment, in front of the nameless shop in Iron Guard City, the queuing commoners were full of sorrow. A sign had been hung at the door. 10 copper coins per pound, limited purchase per person. The commoners completely panicked. They had long guessed that flour sold this cheaply would eventually run out, but who knew this day would come so soon? Baron Monroe rushed over upon hearing the news, charging straight into the shop, staring at the militia manager and putting his cards on the table. "Are you guys really out of flour? Why don't you hand the rest over to me to sell on your behalf so it doesn't fall into the hands of those rich merchants?" The militiaman didn't even pay attention to him, rejecting him flat out. Monroe was so angry he blew his beard and glared, pointing at the merchant servants lining up outside the door, cursing angrily. "You clearly know they are servants of rich merchants. Once you run out of stock, they'll immediately resell it at a high price." The militiaman slowly replied, "We don't have any left, that's why we have limits. We can sell, but only a tiny bit." Monroe completely lost his mind and stormed off. This entire scene was witnessed clearly by the merchant boss, Finn, who was hiding in the corner of the alley. He was so excited his whole body trembled, laughing at the sky. Returning to the courtyard of his manor, looking at the flour covering half his yard, Finn felt incredibly good. Over the past few months, to swallow all this flour, he had emptied the silver coins in his manor's vault. These past few days, he had been staring at the flour in distress, terrified that the supply was endless. But now, the rebel stock had finally bottomed out. He turned and ordered his trusted aide, "Go out immediately and buy flour. As long as the price isn't more than triple, buy it all." His aide awkwardly reminded him, "Master, there are only a little over 1,000 silver coins left in the vault." Finn choked for a second, then turned to his incredibly charming noble wife. "Madam, since we don't have enough silver coins, why don't we transport the flour out of the city and sell a batch at a high price elsewhere?" His wife scoffed, tapping his forehead with her slender jade finger. "Husband, has your brain melted from fever? Outside the city, it's swarming with wasteland pillagers. Can your handful of private guards protect it? The other major merchant guilds already secretly shipped grain out of the city today. Just you wait and watch the show." Sure enough, while Finn was eating lunch at the Lion Tavern, he saw the heads of those merchant guilds roll and crawl down the stairs. All the grain got robbed. Out in the wilderness beyond the city, the labor camp pillagers under my command were currently happily gnawing on white bread. They wore leather boots on their feet, held wooden swords in their hands, and even had the cookies I issued them stuffed in their pockets. These cookies were just like health potion sewn bite and your HP recovers. Seeing the shadow of the merchant caravan in the distance, the leader Garth slapped his thigh in excitement. "Brothers, everyone get up. We got work to do." Robbery. These guys were doing their old jobs. It couldn't be any smoother. A flurry of clubs later, everyone in the caravan was on the ground, and all the grain was hauled right back to Dawn's Keep. Listening to the news in the city, Finn patted his chest in fear, thanking his lucky stars he didn't ship the flour out. But what he didn't know was that as long as he stayed in Iron Guard City for one more day, His money could only go into my pockets. Camera shifts back to Dawn's Keep, military camp training ground. 400 militiamen stood in perfect formation, their murderous aura overflowing. Relying on an unlimited supply of meat and eggs, these guys had long been completely reborn. Every single one of them was broad-shouldered, thick-waisted, and had bulging muscles. After the explosive increase in cattle and sheep production, these 400 men were fully equipped with leather caps, leather chest plates, leather pants, and leather boots. I stepped onto the reviewing stand, looking down at the Izumi Very First Army. My heart raced wildly. All job-changed villagers, step forward. Sir, yes sir. Unequip armor. The front row of officers took off their leather sets in unison. I waved my hand, and Master Armorer Cedric pushed a carriage full of emeralds onto the stage. I engaged in a crazy trading spree with Cedric right on the spot. Set after set of blindingly bright diamond armor was redeemed. I personally walked up to these core officers and handed the enchanted diamond armor to them. Big Doofus Pierce took the diamond armor, grinning from ear to ear. Thank you, Lord Silas. He'll definitely bash a few more pillagers and bring them back. I laughed loudly. You're a general now. Bashing pillagers lowers your status. Next time, bring back a few enemy knight commanders for me. After handing out the armor, I roared again. Shield bearers, step forward. 5 emeralds for a wooden kite shield. Once the shields were distributed, the army's strength skyrocketed to another dimension. Formation strategy. Shield wall tanks long-range arrows. Wooden javelins provide mid-range AoE cover. Spear phalanx pushes forward head-on. Close combat relies on wooden swords for everyone. Add in the healing food I distributed, and these 400 men let alone fighting 1,000, even if they ran into a 10,000 man kingdom regular army. As long as their enchanted armor doesn't break, they could tank it until I swoop in to save the day. I waved my hand broadly, giving an order to Brum beside me. Today, the entire army's pay is doubled. Use the silver coins from my chest to pay them. Consider it my bounty reward. A few weeks later, the academy was finally completed. I walked up to this 4-story, modern-style pure quartz building, looking at its crystal-clear walls, nodding in satisfaction. Next to the stairwell, I used soul sand, magma, signs, and water to create a fully automatic water elevator. Even though I eventually realized only I could use this thing, villagers who went up would just get Soketh flex factor was absolutely maxed out. Early in the morning, countless children with dark bags under their eyes waited at the entrance, so excited they hadn't slept all night. Academy Dean Justin held a parchment alphabet and basic arithmetic sheet, passionately preparing to lead the kids in morning reading. Just then, a rumbling vibration came from the ground. Justin was startled, thinking the earth was angry. But then, a knock came from the door. I opened the door and poked my head in, with Titan right behind me. Good morning, Dean Justin. I brought my Titan to attend school. He's a big guy, so he'll have to trouble you to accommodate him. Justin looked at the extra-large desk and chair in the back row, then at Titan's incredibly oppressive size, his old face turning red with excitement. Teaching an iron golem how to read? This was a chance to go down in history. He bowed repeatedly, shouting that it was no trouble at all. After settling Titan in, I walked out of the academy alone, looking up at the azure sky above Dawn's Keep. Now we lacked no food, healthcare was covered by milk, education was on track, and the military was completely formed. Iron Guard City, with Elwyn keeping an eye on it, would fall into my hands without spilling a drop of blood sooner or later. My main city planning had achieved its phase-zone perfection. Next, it was time to do something huge. I stood at the highest point of Dawn's Keep, looking at the vibrant farmlands and bustling construction sites in the distance. I casually pulled out an enchanted diamond sword flashing with purple light from my inventory, my eyes turning toward the deep underground. Infrastructure is done. Time to take a trip to hell, find some enderman, and farm some ender pearls. Riding the nether-exclusive mount, the Strider, and holding a warped fungus on a stick, I leisurely wandered across the boundless lava sea. I had toured all 5 major biomes of the nether, but I didn't see even a shadow of a warped forest. No warped forest means no enderman, which means farming enderman for ender pearls was a complete dead end. Looks like I could only settle for the next best thing, bartering with piglins. I steered the Strider to shore and directly built a 3-meter-high cobblestone pillar on the edge of the nether wastes, enclosing myself in the middle and leaving only an attack slot. To avoid being flagged as hostile, I specifically switched to a pair of golden boots. Prepared, I pulled out my bow, aimed at the furthest zombified piglin below, and shot an arrow. Roar! With a scream, all the zombified piglins within a dozen soft meters radius instantly saw red. Like a tidal wave, they swarmed crazily toward the base of my stone pillar. Dense packs of piglins squeezed together, falling perfectly into my trap. I sneered, pulled out that diamond sword enchanted with looting 3 and smite, and went absolutely ham slashing at the pig heads below. The smite damage buff made this group of monsters as fragile as paper, and the looting enchantment made the drops multiply on the spot. In just a few minutes, the piglins below were completely wiped out. Jumping off the stone pillar to loot the battlefield, the ground was covered in rotten flesh and gold nuggets. After one wave, crafting 5 gold ingots was a breeze. This is way too satisfying compared to suffering in the mines. I repeated the process, farming several waves in a row, forcefully scraping together a full stack, exactly 64 gold ingots. Walking up to an isolated piglin, I directly dug a deep pit, kicked it in, and then smashed all 64 gold ingots onto its face. These greedy guys have to inspect the gold ingots for half a day after picking them up. When it finally swallowed all the gold ingots, spat out a pile pile of random junk. I jumped into the pit to check my loot, and my face instantly turned black. 2 stacks of gravel, a pile of iron nuggets, a few potions of fire resistance, but the thing I wanted most, ender pearlet, only gave me 2. A whole stack of gold ingots, just to exchange for 2 pearls. This drop rate was absolutely rage-inducing. Depressed, I opened the crafting table, preparing to make a chest to store this garbage. But right then, on the left side of the crafting menu, a mysterious, dark purple block embedded with glowstone on all 4 sides instantly grabbed my absolute attention. Respawn anchor. This thing was way more broken than ender pearls. Meanwhile, on the official road outside Iron Guard City, a squad of pillagers being escorted by city guards was trudging toward Dawn's Keep. The pillager boss leading them was named Lone Wolf, a ruthless guy who licked blood from his blade. As soon as he was locked into the cobblestone prison, this old dog's criminal heart wouldn't die. He immediately called over a few trusted aides, whispering about how to crack the city gate defenses and preparing for a prison break. Too bad. Before he could finish, the door was violently pushed open. Brum walked in with a cold face, grabbed Lone Wolf by the collar, and dragged him straight into the nether portal. Half a day later, the cell door opened again. Lone Wolf was thrown back in like a pile of mud. His eyes were rolled back, his body trembling like a sieve, and he looked as if his soul had been sucked dry. His underlings quickly surrounded him, asking if they were still breaking out. Terrified, Lone Wolf scrambled to the corner, tightly hugging his head, crazily muttering, 4 times. I died exactly 4 times. I'm not running. Even if you beat me to death, I'm not running. This is the absolute power of the respawn anchor. Scene shift to Iron Guard City, Finn Manor. The blood-sucking merchant Finn was currently pacing wildly around his courtyard like an ant on a hot pan. It's been months. Why hasn't those heretics' flour sold out yet? With red eyes, he stared dead at the mountains of flour piled up in his own yard. To swallow the cheap grain we released, he had drained his manor's vault of silver coins down to the absolute bottom. Now, he almost couldn't even afford to buy sugar. He originally wanted to transport the flour out of the city to sell at a high price, but pillagers were running rampant outside the city, and ordinary private guards simply couldn't protect the grain carts. Driven to a dead end, he gritted his teeth, prepared 700 silver coins, plus 10 of the profits upon success, and humbly ran to beg Knight Commander Wulfric to use the city guards to escort their grain caravan out of the city. Wulfric was sitting in the camp hall at the time, chugging ale. After listening to Finn's meticulous 3 decoy routes, 1 real grain route plan, his face filled with smiles and he agreed on the spot. The moment Finn left, Wulfric literally laughed out loud. He turned and ordered his trusted aide, 10 profit? Are you treating a beggar? Send a message to Dawn's Keep. I will personally escort this batch of grain, and I'll deliver every single grain to Lord Silas. I'm going to anger these blood-sucking corrupt merchants to death. A few days later, the aide who was transporting the grain scrambled back to the manor, covered in blood, kneeling before Finn, crying, Master, the grain was all robbed. That dog Wulfric is in cahoots with the rebels. He personally delivered our grain right into the rebel camp. With a massive boom, a thunderbolt seemed to explode in Finn's brain. His body trembled violently, pointing at the aide, completely unable to speak a single word. Outside the courtyard, the heads of the other merchant guilds who had been scammed just as badly were frantically smashing the door and cursing, demanding an explanation from him. Finn felt a sudden severe cramp in his chest. The world spun, his knees gave out, and he fainted dead away on the spot. When he woke up again, he was swallowed by endless venomous malice. Gripping the edge of his bed tightly, he growled through gritted teeth, Wulfric, if you won't let me live, then we all die together. He went bankrupt, bought connections, and reported Wulfric to the royal capital special envoy under his real name for treason and colluding with the enemy. The envoy, already stressing over local riots, used Wulfric as a scapegoat. An official document smashed down, stripping Wulfric of his Knight Commander armor and throwing him into the death row dungeon. Early spring, the ice and snow melted. I called Elwyn, Brum, and Albert to the nether portal. Even though they were my core squad, hearing we were going into hell made all their faces turn pale. I took the lead and stepped through the portal. After they adapted to the nether's high temperature and pungent sulfur smell, I led them to a hidden underground room below the cobblestone house. In the center of the room, 4 blocks emitting a dark purple glow were neatly arranged. Each of you find one. Place your hand on it and silently chant use in your mind. I stared at them, my tone allowing for 0 refusal. The 3 exchanged glances and did as instructed. As a bizarre light flashed, I pulled out wooden signs and wrote their names on each block. Lord Silas, what divine artifact is this exactly? Albert couldn't suppress the shock in his heart and asked with a trembling voice. I grinned, my voice echoing in the cramped basement. This is called a respawn anchor. Simply put, it's filing a report with the Grim Reaper. From now on, if you die in an accident, as long as this anchor has energy, I can forcefully fish your souls back and reconstruct your flesh. As the words fell, the 3 instantly froze in place, their eyes erupting in extreme fanaticism and awe. Resurrection, reversing life and death. Brum trembled with excitement. My lord, Brom's life belongs to you for all eternity. I waved my hand, telling them to go back to work. Elwyn stayed behind and reported the news of Wulfric's arrest to me. The opportunity has arrived. Elwyn's eyes flickered. Wulfric transported grain for us and offended the noble merchants. Now he is wrongfully imprisoned. As long as we rescue him, his prestige in Ironguard City will be our best stepping stone. It is indeed time to visit Ironguard City. I nodded, turning back to the main city. To ensure this trip was absolutely foolproof, I pulled out the ender pearls I had just bartered for and started building an ender pearl stasis chamber. Dig a 7-block deep pit, place soul sand at the very bottom, and fill the column with water. The soul sand instantly generated upward flowing bubbles. I placed a trapdoor at the top, took an ender pearl, and threw it hard right into the center of the water column. The pearl fell into the water and was pushed up by the bubbles, quietly floating on the surface. As long as nobody touched it, it would remain perpetually active. I turned to Elwyn. Tomorrow at noon, or if you encounter any unexpected situations, immediately close this trapdoor. The moment the trapdoor touches the pearl, I will be instantly teleported back here. Understood? Elwyn nodded solemnly. With everything prepared, I grabbed Arthur, who was wearing a full set of leather armor, pulled out a second ender pearl, aimed it in the direction of Ironguard City, swung my arm, and threw it with all my might. Off we go. The sound of the air tearing echoed, and the scene before my eyes instantly twisted and ripped apart. The next second, Arthur and I appeared out of thin air on a yellow dirt wasteland dozens of miles away. Stepping out of my absolute domain, the true chaotic reality of the kingdom unfolded before my eyes like a painting. Cracked earth, tree bark completely stripped and eaten, and bleached white bones visible everywhere by the roadside. This was the truest despair under the rule of King Charles. We walked forward along the official road and happened to run into a merchant caravan heading to Ironguard City to buy grain. The leader, an uncle named Ryan, saw that I had an extraordinary aura and actively invited us to ride with them. On the road, the caravan suddenly acted like they were facing a deadly enemy. On the slope, a squad of pillagers appeared, holding wooden swords and wearing leather boots. That was the exact labor camp squad I had sent out to rob the rich merchants of Ironguard City. When the pillagers saw the caravan and were about to make their move, their eyes swept over and instantly locked onto my face. These arrogant bandits instantly turned pale with terror, completely panicking. I subtly made a hand gesture, and like they had received a royal pardon, they rolled and crawled out of sight behind the hill. Ryan watched this completely dumbfounded, wiping his cold sweat, exclaiming, "Lord Silas, why did those pillagers run away like they saw a ghost? It seems since Wulfric was jailed, Ironguard City really is cursed." I smiled, not saying a word. Entering Ironguard City, the ancient city walls and watchtowers did have some presence, but the moment we stepped through the gates, a pungent stench hit my face. The streets were piled with garbage and feces. The medieval filter was completely shattered. Suppressing my nausea, I brought Arthur straight to the castle dungeon. At the prison entrance, 2 guards crossed their spears to block our path. Without a word, I pulled out a heavy gold nugget and shoved it over. The guards' eyes went straight. They bit it, and their attitude instantly changed to a flattering smile. "My lord is truly generous, but you really can't enter this prison right now. Lord Baron Monroe is inside interrogating the Knight Commander. Nobody dares let anyone pass." I nodded, pretended to leave, and took Arthur to a blind spot around the corner. Since we can't walk through the front door, well, just exploit a bug. I pulled out an ender pearl, aimed it through the narrow iron bars of a window high up on the dungeon wall, flicked my wrist, and threw it hard. Swoosh! The screen shifted, and I was already standing firmly right in the center of the dark, damp prison cell. Deep inside the cell, Baron Monroe was earnestly persuading Wulfric to quickly break out and run for his life. Wulfric, wearing a heavy cane in his hands and feet, completely locked in iron chains, was just about to reply when he suddenly noticed something and violently raised his head. The moment he got a clear look at my face, this tough guy who killed without blinking on the battlefield was so scared his blood completely drained away. He panicked, trying to stand up, but his chains tripped him up, and he comically slammed into the ground. Finally, he forcefully straightened his back, dropped heavily to one knee, his voice trembling so much the pitch changed. "Guilty servant Wulfric greets Lord Silas." Monroe was startled by the roar. He jerked his head around, staring dead at me, who had appeared out of thin air. "How did you get in here, Silas? You're that cult leader deceiving the rebels." I couldn't be bothered with this stubborn old noble. I walked straight up to the iron bars, looking down at the shivering Wulfric. "Wulfric, are you afraid of death?" My voice sounded exceptionally cold in the dead silent cell. Wulfric swallowed hard, cold sweat pouring down. "I am. Good that you're afraid." I raised a finger, my tone carrying an irresistible, oppressive aura. "I give you 2 choices. First, I break you out and take you back to Dawn's Keep. From then on, you hide your name, live as an ordinary serf, and continue atoning for your sins." I paused, my eyes suddenly turning ice cold, staring dead into his eyes. "Second, you must die right here. Use your life to pay for the sins of killing innocent civilians for merit back then. Take your soul and personally go to the underworld to meet the Grim Reaper. If the Grim Reaper judges that your sins have been cleansed, I will, right here in the living world, personally reconstruct your flesh and bring you back to the mortal realm." My voice was like a massive bronze bell, vibrating so hard the cell walls buzzed. "Don't worry if the Grim Reaper disagrees. As long as your sins are washed clean, even if I have to sever life and death, I guarantee your resurrection. As soon as the words fell, Monroe completely lost his mind. He pointed at my nose and cursed. Complete nonsense. The Grim Reaper is the lord of the underworld. Why would he interfere with the mortal realm? You black magician. Framing the Knight Commander into prison wasn't enough, and now you want to use this absurd heresy to force him to die. What are your intentions? Monroe, shut the hell up. Before I could speak, Wulfric, kneeling on the ground, went completely insane. His eyes blew dread. He dragged his heavy chains and desperately slammed against the iron bars, wishing he could break out and cover Monroe's mouth. He was someone who had witnessed miracles with his own eyes. Monroe's words were basically putting the lives of every single citizen of Iron Guard City on the line to violently seek death in front of a god. I waved my hand, interrupting Wulfric's madness. No need to argue. Wulfric, I'll give you 1 day to consider. Tomorrow at this time I will come back. Tell me your answer. After speaking, I turned around without any hesitation, taking large strides into the shadows of the prison corridor. Behind me, only Monroe was still cursing Wulfric for being a brainwashed idiot, while Wulfric stared dead at the blue bricks on the floor, his eyes flashing with a light woven of despair and madness. I walked out of the prison, standing on the filthy streets of Iron Guard City, looking up at the glaring sun, listening to the intense arguing between Monroe and Wulfric deep in the prison. The corner of my mouth curled into a confident sneer. No matter which path you choose, Wulfric, from today onward, your life belongs to me. Out of the death row prison, I took Arthur and directly used an ender pearl to teleport into the Iron Guard City market. Rarely getting the chance to enter a medieval castle city, I fully activated tourist mode. Cobblestone dirt roads, brick houses packed closely together on both sides, and commoners mostly wearing rough linen robes. Nobody had their hair down. All the men tied up their hair and wore headbands. We squeezed into a crowd watching acrobats. Fire breathing and knife throwing were reaching their climax. After one round, the performer held out a broken bowl asking for tips. Half the freeloading crowd scattered instantly. The performer walked up to me, his eyes timid. I snapped my fingers. Arthur, tip him. Arthur dug around but didn't have any copper coins, so he just pulled out a shiny silver coin and tossed it into the bowl. The performer's eyes went straight. He immediately nodded like a woodpecker, blurting out a toast of blessings that lasted for dozens of seconds. Being the one top donator for once felt pretty good. Walking to a parchment scroll shop with a signboard reading Fountain of Wisdom, I casually opened the Life of the Saints and Knights epics. It was all in ancient Latin. It made my brain hurt just looking at it, so I quickly threw it down and left. Getting hungry from walking, we swept through the street food. Honey roasted apples, bony and roast ribs, soft oat bread, eating as we walked. Finally, we entered a tavern called the Lion Tavern, ordered a pound of smoked beef and ate it with flatbread. Crispy, soft, and falling apart. Awesome. Fully fed, I strolled over to the old church to scout the location. This place judges souls. It's the perfect spot to build a nether portal. Just as I entered the main hall, I saw a bunch of commoners surrounding an apprentice priest, aggressively interrogating him. When exactly is Lord Silas' holy statue going to be brought into the church? Lord Baron's notice has been posted. Why hasn't anything happened yet? Arthur stared wide-eyed from the side. I quickly grabbed him and slipped back to the inn. Noon the next day, I ate a golden carrot to max out my hunger bar, told Arthur to hide well, then pulled out an ender pearl and threw it straight at the gap in the iron window, bugging my way via flash step back into the death row cell. Wulfric had 2 dark circles under his eyes, the whites of his eyes completely bloodshot. He clearly hadn't slept a wink all night. Seeing me appear out of thin air, his entire body jolted. Forcing himself to stand up straight, he gave a deep bow right down to the ground, placing his hand on his chest in salute. Lord Silas. I choose the second path, choosing to die. He's got guts. I pulled out my diamond axe. Hand raised, axe fell. Clang, clang. The chains shattered. I grabbed Wulfric's shoulder and crushed the ender pearl in my hand. The screen flashed, and we instantly appeared in front of the nether portal at Dawn's Keep. Seeing the boiling lava behind him, Wulfric's face lost all color, thinking I was going to send him to the underworld right now. I kicked him over to Elwyn, telling him to find a place to lay low and wait for the royal capital's execution order. Meanwhile, back in the Iron Guard City death row cell, Baron Monroe was sitting at his desk, stressing out. The jailer scrambled in, shouting that the Knight Commander broke out. Monroe was overjoyed, just pulling out his quill to write an apology letter. When the jailer rushed back in, shouting that the Knight Commander was back sitting in his cell again, Monroe was so furious he ripped up the document in his hand, cursing Wulfric for having water in his brain. With Wulfric sorted, I turned around and started hyperdimensionally striking the kingdom's tech tree at Dawn's Keep. On an empty grassy field, Titan pushed over an 8-meter-tall wooden scaffolding. 2 identical wooden gears were suspended above and below, painted with red cinnabar lines. I stacked blocks up and placed a bucket of water. The water cascaded down, hitting the gears and spinning them wildly. Once the rotation speed stabilized, the upper and lower red lines remained completely, perfectly synced relative to each other. I pointed at the gears and spoke to Master Albert. Master Albert, the speed at which this water flows down is always exactly 4 blocks meters per second. Absolutely constant, without a single trace of deviation. Albert stared dead at the wooden frame, his brain spinning like crazy. A few seconds later, he slapped his thigh hard. I understand. Since the water flow speed is constant, as long as we adjust the size of the small gear so that one full rotation aligns perfectly, that one rotation equals exactly 1 second. I snapped my fingers. Smart. Exactly. Next, you guys are gonna build gears for me. 60 seconds is a minute, 60 minutes is an hour, 24 hours is a day. From now on, time and distance in this territory will strictly be calculated in meters and seconds. The fundamental physics of Minecraft officially took over this medieval kingdom. 1 month later, in the royal capital Golden Lion Keep, King Charles was working crazy overtime reviewing documents. With a flick of his quill, he checked off a name on a death row list, Wulfric. The execution order was sent back to Iron Guard City. Guillotine at noon. The execution ground was packed with commoners from miles around. The crying was deafening. The wailing filled the fields. These people, who had been protected by the Knight Commander, were watching their benefactor go to his death, holding back tears in utter frustration. Wulfric had his helmet removed, his hands tied behind his back, a wooden sign marking his heresy death sentence hanging around his neck. The moment he was pushed onto the execution platform, he was originally shaking like a leaf, but when he looked up, he locked eyes with the faces of the merchant guild bosses standing on the high platform in the distance. Finn was swirling his red wine glass, a contemptuous sneer on his lips, looking at him like a dead dog. Wulfric suddenly wasn't panicking anymore. He stared dead at Finn, a thunderous, manic laugh erupting from his chest. Ha 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 ha, Finn, I will be back. The bell tolled. High noon. Execute. The executioner swung the massive execution axe, bringing down a heavy gust of wind. A dull sound of bone and flesh separating echoed. Wulfric only saw his vision spin wildly, the world turning upside down. Before the pain even hit, his consciousness was instantly sucked dry. Blood sprayed wildly, dyeing the wooden block of the execution ground red. Monroe painfully closed his eyes. Finn put down his wine glass, turning downstairs in satisfaction. Scene shift. In endless darkness, Wulfric suddenly snapped his eyes open. Surrounding him was a sealed, underground stone chamber. He gasped heavily for air and touched his neck. Completely intact, the purple respawn anchor glowed faintly behind him. I stood in front of him and tossed him a set of linen clothes. Put this on. Follow me. Wulfric clumsily threw on the clothes and followed me through the nether portal. A flash of light and shadows, and glaring sunlight spilled onto his face once more. The scent of green grass rushed into his nose. Wulfric's knees gave out and he dropped straight to his knees. He looked at his perfectly unscarred arms, backhanded himself, and slapped his own face hard. A red handprint surfaced. It burned. Alive. He really came back from the dead. He stared dead at me, extreme fanaticism and absolute loyalty erupting in his eyes. Even the Grim Reaper had to give Lord Silas face. In this life, his life was absolutely 100 sold to me. I pulled out a full set of diamond armor flashing with purple enchantments from my inventory and threw it right at him, plus a backup leather set and a bottle of honey that could cure all poisons. Put it on. From now on, nobody can touch you. Your life is under my protection. Wulfric took the diamond armor with both hands, dropping to one knee to kiss my boots. At the exact same time, the Iron Guard City execution ground completely exploded. The executioner had just finished wiping his large axe. When he turned around, where was the corpse on the wooden block? Even the blood all over the ground had evaporated into thin air. Only an empty, blood-stained prisoner's uniform was left on the spot. The commoners were dead silent at first, then erupted into earth-shattering cheers. Everyone dropped to their knees in unison, frantically crossing themselves and praying. Lord Silas has manifested. The saint has taken the Knight Commander away. Monroe shoved through the crowd and threw himself onto the execution platform. Staring at the empty prisoner's uniform, his worldview was crushed into powder. On the other side, corrupt merchant Finn was sitting in a private room at the Lion Tavern, getting ready to celebrate. Downstairs in the main hall, a lute strummed, and a traveling bard began to sing. Today, we tell the story of a god incarnating as a mortal. The saint could not bear to see the masses suffer. Defying the iron laws of the divine realm, he descended, losing his divine powers. Fortunately, a hunter saved him, setting up a trial. Following that, steel divine soldiers rose from the earth, and with a wave of his hand, holy wheat fully matured. Finn had been sipping his wine, but as he listened, the hand holding his cup froze in midair. Iron laws of the divine realm, hunter, steel divine soldiers, holy wheat, this wasn't some myth. This was exactly identical to the pillager intelligence he had gathered. A massive buzzing explosion went off in Finn's brain. The flour that bankrupted him, that he could never finish selling, wasn't hoarded grain at all, it was grown by the very hands of a god. He didn't mess with some cult. He messed with a true, living god who controlled life and death. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his silk robes. The tavern owner was beside him, delivering the final blow. Sir Finn, you didn't know? After the Knight Commander was beheaded, his corpse vanished out of thin air. The whole city says Lord Silas resurrected him. Finn's heart violently cramped, his face turning as pale as a corpse. He kicked his chair over, didn't even bother to pay the bill, and rolled and crawled out of the tavern. He messed with a true Gaudi's merchant guild was completely finished. I couldn't be bothered with the terror of these ants. I was busy inspecting my infrastructure at Dawn's Keep. Walking into the quartz-built academy, Dean Justin was stressing over Titan. Titan's blocky head was ridiculously dumb. He wrote his own name crookedly, but somehow managed to write the word Silas perfectly straight. I walked over and patted his big iron head, listening to Justin's report. Out of the refugees, that little girl with the pink flower, Margaret, actually possessed an eidetic Memorian absolute genius. Good RNG found another treasure. I hopped onto Titan's shoulder. Let's go, patrol the territory. Amidst massive rumbling, a gigantic blue building rose from the ground, the large-scale ice factory. Wrapped in glass on the outside, the inner layer was paved with a meter of packed ice. I exploited packed ice's extreme heat absorption properties, paired with infinite water sources, letting the job-changed masons hold silk touch pickaxes and crazily farm ice blocks inside. The entire process completely ignored seasonal temperatures. Pure, natural, 100 free. Walking further, there was an inverted pyramid-shaped giant beehive complex. Campfires were placed all around the building, and the bottom layer was a vibrant flower field spanning 100 meters. Hundreds of half-meter-long giant bees blotted out the sun, their buzzing deafening. An ordinary person would pee their pants just looking at it. I took large strides into the bee swarm and casually patted the square head of a bee that flew in front of me. Not only did they not attack me, but they were as docile as a pack of puppies. Looking at the giant bees filling the sky, the corners of my mouth slowly curled up. As long as I don't initiate an attack, every single life form in this world, all the absolute rules, unconditionally obey me. I stood at the top of the pyramid beehive, looking down at the territory I had completely transformed using block mechanics, surrounded by mountains of honey and ice block resources. I turned and looked in the direction of Iron Guard City. Base resources are fully maxed out, and the tech tree is lit up. Next, it's time to hit this old, rotten order of the Roland Kingdom with some true blocky shock and awe.